You've been fighting life without even realizing it. Fighting the changes, the losses, the uncertainty. They told you that control would make you safe, that planning every detail would protect you from pain. But if that were true, why do you still feel tense? Why do you still feel that knot in your chest, the constant need to push, to resist, to hold on? The truth is, life was never meant to be forced. The more you resist, the heavier it feels. The more you cling, the more it slips through your fingers. But there is another way. A way Buddhists have whispered for thousands of years. A wisdom that doesn't just tell you to let go, but teaches you how to stop grasping in the first place. Tonight, as you hear these words, something will begin to shift. The tension you've been carrying will slowly soften. The storm in your mind will calm, like waves settling after a long night. You'll begin to see that peace isn't found in fighting life, it's found in flowing with it. This is not just another sleep story. This is a journey into Buddhist wisdom, a path that shows you how to stop resisting and start living. By the time morning comes, you won't just feel rested. You'll feel lighter, freer, more alive. Are you ready to surrender? Let's begin. You've taken the first breath into this journey, and now the path begins to open. There is a kind of freedom that most people never taste in their entire lives, not because it is hidden, but because it is buried under layers of assumptions. You've been told things must have fixed meaning, that people, objects, even your own identity are solid and unchanging. And yet, beneath that belief is where tension grows, where resistance lives. To step into Buddhist wisdom is to step into a truth that feels at once disorienting and liberating. Nothing exists in the way you think it does. The mind craves stability. It wants to label, define, and hold on as if permanence could ever be real. But that very craving is the root of suffering. When you expect life to behave like stone but it flows like water, you feel betrayed, abandoned, even fearful. Emptiness, known in Buddhism as shunyata, is not a cold void, but the invitation to see through illusions. It shows you that things are not solid. They are shifting, fluid, interdependent. Your resistance to life begins to dissolve the moment you see this. What once felt like walls closing in begins to reveal itself as doors swinging open. Think about the pain of losing something you thought would last forever. A relationship, a job, your youth, even your health. What is that pain, really? It is the collision between expectation and reality. Expectation insists, this must stay the same, while reality whispers, everything changes. When you recognize that nothing has an independent, permanent existence, that collision softens. Loss becomes less of an attack and more of a movement. You begin to see that just as night follows day, endings are not failures, but part of the cycle that allows life itself to continue. Emptiness does not erase meaning, it reshapes it. Take a flower as an example. You see its petals and colors and think of it as a single, self-existing thing. But look deeper. That flower only exists because of soil, sunlight, rain, pollination, air. Each condition is connected to countless others. Clouds forming far away, rivers carrying water, farmers protecting land. The flower is not one thing. It is many processes woven together. Its beauty is not diminished by this truth. It becomes even more precious because you see how vast its story really island. The same is true of you. You are not a fixed, permanent self. You are a dance of countless influences. Your ancestors, your choices, the environment, even the strangers you meet in passing. To resist change is to resist the very nature of what you are. This understanding is not meant to remain intellectual. The real transformation comes when you feel it in your bones. When you stop clinging to rigid ideas of who you are, you begin to breathe differently. You stop defending an image, stop fearing its collapse. Your worth no longer rests on fragile conditions. You become lighter, like a bird finally opening its wings. Emptiness also unravels fear. Think of how much of your anxiety comes from trying to control outcomes. What people think of you, whether you succeed, how long something will last. But when you see that each moment is interdependent, you realize you were never in control in the way you thought. Control was always partial, always shared with infinite causes and conditions. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you stop exhausting yourself by fighting battles that can never be won. Instead of tightening around life, you soften into it. Action flows naturally without resistance. In Buddhist teachings, emptiness is often described as the middle between extremes. It avoids the trap of saying everything exists exactly as we see it, and the opposite trap of nothing exists at all. Both extremes create confusion. The middle reveals that things exist, but not independently. They exist in relation, as patterns and conditions, not as isolated absolutes. Understanding this relieves the tension of trying to hold on to what cannot be held. There is also a profound compassion hidden in this wisdom. When you see that no one has an isolated, unchanging self, blame begins to dissolve. You start to understand that people act out of conditions. They did not choose their upbringing, their wounds, their culture, their struggles. This doesn't mean harmful actions are excused, but it does mean your heart has more space for forgiveness. Resistance to others softens into understanding, and judgment turns into empathy. Suddenly, life feels less like a battlefield and more like a shared journey. Even your own mistakes take on a new light. Instead of resisting your past, clinging to regret, or defining yourself by one choice, you see those actions as part of an ever-shifting process. You are not the same person who made those mistakes, just as the river that flows past your feet is not the same water that flowed there yesterday. Each moment is an opportunity to start anew, because there is no fixed self to be chained. But here is where it becomes most powerful. Emptiness doesn't leave you with nothing. It leaves you with possibility. A fixed thing cannot change, but an interdependent thing can transform endlessly. Because you are not solid, you are free to grow. Because the world is not rigid, it is alive with potential. When you stop resisting, you stop fearing transformation. Life becomes a canvas that can be painted again and again, not a prison with locked doors. The practice of embracing emptiness begins not with grand gestures but with small moments of awareness. When you feel frustration rise because plans shift, notice what your mind is clinging to. Is it the belief that things should go a certain way? When you feel anxious about the future, ask yourself, am I resisting uncertainty, or am I open to what may come? This is how emptiness becomes not an abstract idea but a living wisdom, a daily teacher guiding you back to peace. And there is something almost tender about it. When you let go of the illusion of solidity, life feels less like a heavy block you must push and more like a current you can swim with. It carries you, supports you, surprises you. Even pain, when seen through emptiness, becomes less sharp. It still arises, but it passes through you rather than sticking, because you no longer resist its movement. You learn to meet each experience as passing weather, not as permanent sky. This is why Buddhist masters often smile so easily. It's not because life is always pleasant for them, but because they see the deeper truth. They are not resisting the rain, the wind, the storms of life. They know these too will shift, dissolve, change. Their peace is not fragile because it is not tied to what stays the same. It is rooted in the flow itself. As you let these words sink in tonight, notice how the weight begins to lift. The endless push to control, to secure, to guarantee softens. You begin to feel the relief of not having to hold on so tightly. Emptiness is not loss, it is freedom. It is the invitation to live without chains, to love without fear of endings, to walk through life with open hands instead of clenched fists. When the weight of clinging begins to soften, what follows is the question of how to live each moment without being pulled back into the old struggle. The mind still wants to interfere, to control, to push against what island. You may already sense that emptiness clears the space, but space alone is not enough. You need a way of moving within it. This is where another ancient wisdom comes to meet you, the teaching of effortless action, Wu Wei, a way of living that feels less like resistance and more like harmony. It is not about doing nothing, but about doing in such a way that effort no longer feels like friction. There is a rhythm underneath everything, and when you stop forcing, you begin to hear it. Wu Wei is often misunderstood. Some think it means laziness, avoidance, or a refusal to act. But look closely, and you will see that it points to the opposite. It is action at its purest. Action that flows without inner conflict, without waste, without the endless resistance that turns life into a battlefield. Just as a river shapes valleys and nourishes fields without straining, so too can your life move with quiet strength when you stop fighting the current. The paradox is that what appears soft becomes unbreakable, and what seems yielding often outlasts what is rigid. Consider the way you often respond to obstacles. There is a tightening, a pushing, a desperate attempt to force outcomes. Plans fall apart, someone speaks against you, a door closes. Instantly, the body hardens, the mind burns with tension. This resistance may feel like strength, but in truth it drains you. Energy that could have gone into responding wisely is consumed by struggle. Wu Wei shows another way. When resistance drops, you no longer waste yourself on pushing back. You meet each moment with clarity and adapt without the weight of inner conflict. Think of water. It does not resist the rocks in its path, yet it carves mountains over time. It bends, it shifts, it flows into every space available, but it never loses its essence. Its strength lies in its softness, in its refusal to fight. In this way, Wu Wei invites you to meet life. Instead of battling every change, you learn to bend, to flow around obstacles, to find openings where rigidity sees only walls. This is not passivity, but the highest form of responsiveness. In daily life, the resistance often hides in the smallest places. It is not only in great struggles but in the irritation when things do not go as planned, the subtle tightening when someone interrupts, the unease when faced with uncertainty. Wu Wei teaches that these small resistances accumulate, becoming the background noise of suffering. By noticing them, you can start to soften. When the bus is late, instead of burning with frustration, you breathe into patience. When conversation doesn't go your way, you let the words pass without needing to win. Each time you do this, the current of life carries you instead of dragging you under. There is a natural intelligence in this way of living. The body knows it already. Your breath does not resist inhaling or exhaling. The heart does not resist pumping blood. The seasons turn, trees grow, rivers flow, all without strain. Only the human mind interrupts, trying to dictate how life should unfold. Wu Wei is remembering what every other part of nature already knows, that balance comes not through resistance but through alignment. In work, this wisdom brings profound change. Instead of treating tasks as battles to conquer, you treat them as expressions of rhythm. You stop resisting what needs to be done and instead move with it. Focus arises more easily, effort feels lighter, and creativity begins to emerge. Resistance wastes energy, but flow renews it. This is why many people speak of losing themselves in their work when they are most aligned. Time disappears because the mind is not fighting against itself. Even relationships begin to transform under Wu Wei. Much of the conflict between people arises from the refusal to yield, the need to be right, the insistence on control. But what if you softened that? Not into weakness, but into listening. When you stop resisting another person's perspective, you begin to hear them fully. You may not agree, but you no longer waste your energy on pushing against. Harmony often arises not from victory, but from release. This is the softness that disarms anger and creates peace. Wu Wei also teaches patience. Water does not rush, yet it arrives. In a culture that glorifies urgency, you are told to fight time, to demand results now. But rushing often creates mistakes, stress, and disappointment. Effortless action means allowing things to ripen. You still act, but you do so in rhythm with time, not in defiance of it. The fruit that ripens slowly carries the sweetest flavor. So, too, in life, what grows without force endures. The practice begins with awareness. When you feel yourself straining, notice. When your body tenses, when your breath shortens, when frustration builds, these are signs of resistance. In that moment, pause. Ask yourself, is this push necessary, or am I fighting against what is? Often you will see that the struggle is not with the world, but with your own demand that it be different. Wu Wei does not mean you accept injustice or refuse to act. It means that when you act, you do so without inner turmoil, without wasted resistance. Your energy becomes precise, directed, like water, finding the lowest path and moving with ease. Even rest becomes different under this teaching. Many resist rest, believing it to be weakness, laziness, or wasted time. Yet without rest, there is no renewal. Wu Wei shows that rest is not the absence of action but part of the flow itself. The river has currents and eddies, fast streams and calm pools. Both are necessary. In your life, allowing pauses, silence, stillness, is part of moving without resistance. From rest comes clarity. From clarity comes strength. What may surprise you is that this way of life brings not only peace but power. Power not in the sense of domination, but in resilience. A rigid tree breaks in the storm, but the flexible reed bends and survives. When you stop resisting, you become less fragile. Obstacles still come, but they do not shatter you. They move around you, through you, and in time, you move past them. This is strength born of softness, resilience born of surrender. Wu Wei also dissolves the false division between effort and ease. Many believe life is either struggle or comfort, either push or collapse. But in truth, effort and ease are not enemies. They are aspects of the same flow. The river moves, yet it is never tense. The wave rises with force, yet it falls with grace. Your own actions can be like this. You can give your full energy to a task without strain, speak your truth without hostility, pursue goals without desperation. It is not what you do, but the way you do it without inner resistance. There is deep trust in this teaching. Trust that life carries you even when you do not see the outcome. Trust that release does not mean defeat, but alignment. This trust is not blind. It is grounded in seeing how life has always moved, how despite every storm you have endured, something in you continues, carries on, adapts. Wu Wei reminds you to rest into that trust, to let go of the need to wrestle with what already has its own rhythm. As you sit with this teaching, notice how even now the body may feel softer, the mind less tense. There is relief in realizing you do not have to fight every current. The world does not require your constant resistance. It only asks for your presence, your willingness to flow, your trust to act when the moment is right. In that release, you find something greater than control. You find freedom. When life begins to flow with less resistance, another challenge quietly reveals itself. Even when you stop fighting the current, the mind still reaches out, trying to hold on to the passing waves. There is grasping, subtle yet constant, a reaching toward what feels pleasant and a tightening against what feels uncertain. Wu Wei teaches how to move without force, but deeper freedom comes when you no longer need to clutch at every moment. This is where the art of non-grasping begins, not as a command to let go after you've already clung, but as a way of never clinging in the first place. Grasping often hides behind what seems natural. You hear a kind word and immediately wish it would never end. You experience success and crave its repetition. You meet loss and scramble to replace what has gone. Each of these movements feels instinctive, but underneath is a deeper misunderstanding. The belief that by holding tightly, you can secure happiness. Yet the tighter the grip, the faster things slip away, and the more restless you become. Non-grasping is not about indifference, but about recognizing the futility of the grasp itself. In practice, this means meeting each moment as it arises, allowing it to be complete without needing to trap it. A smile, a taste of food, a passing song, all can be fully enjoyed without reaching to freeze them in place. The beauty is found in the experience itself, not in trying to preserve it. This shift feels subtle, but it transforms the texture of life. Instead of anxiety about endings, there is appreciation in presence. The flower is no less beautiful because it fades. In fact, its impermanence deepens its value. This art requires honesty. The mind will whisper, "If I let go, I will lose everything." But in truth, what you cling to is already slipping away. No grasp has ever stopped time. Holding on only creates tension, the ache of wanting permanence where none exists. Non-grasping is freedom not from life, but from the constant inner pulling that makes life heavier than its island. There is also a great tenderness in this practice. When you stop grasping, you stop using people and things as anchors to secure your sense of self. You allow others to be who they are, without trying to make them your possession. Love becomes lighter, more generous, less suffocating. Friendship becomes a shared journey rather than a cage. Even your relationship with yourself changes. Instead of clutching at fixed identities, success, beauty, youth, knowledge, you allow yourself to shift and evolve. In meditation, this teaching becomes clear. Thoughts come, feelings arise, sensations appear. The usual habit is to hold on to some and push away others. Non-grasping means watching them appear and vanish without chasing. At first, this feels impossible. The urge to latch on is strong. But with practice, you begin to notice the natural rhythm. Everything that arises already carries the seed of its departure. When you see this deeply, grasping loses its power. You no longer need to release, because you never closed your fist around the experience in the first place. In daily life, non-grasping can be practiced in the simplest ways. When eating, taste fully without craving another bite before finishing the one in your mouth. When listening, be present without planning how to hold the moment. When success comes, acknowledge it without needing it to define your future. These small gestures train the mind to rest in openness rather than contraction. Over time, they build into a habit of freedom. The consequences are profound. Anxiety loosens because much of anxiety is built on clutching at future outcomes. Jealousy weakens because jealousy is born from trying to hold what belongs to another. Anger softens because anger often hides the pain of losing control. Even grief, though still tender, becomes less suffocating when you stop grasping at the impossible hope of keeping what has already changed. Non-grasping does not erase emotion, but it changes your relationship with it. There is also wisdom here about desire. Desire itself is not the problem. It is the grasping that poisons it. A desire for learning, for love, for beauty. These are natural expressions of being alive. But when desire hardens into grasping, it turns sharp. Non-grasping allows you to enjoy desire as movement, as inspiration, without needing it to trap the world into your design. You walk toward your goals, but you do not cling to the outcome. This balance brings both joy and peace. Joy in striving, peace in release. Non-grasping also reshapes your relationship with time. Much of human suffering comes from clinging to past identities or craving future certainty. The mind grasps at memory, trying to preserve what is already gone. It grasps at expectation, trying to secure what has not yet arrived. In both directions, it misses the only place where life is actually lived, here. When you stop grasping, you return to presence, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. The moment expands, and you find richness where before there was only restlessness. The teaching also reveals something subtle about joy. Many believe joy is in accumulation, in collecting moments, possessions, accomplishments. But joy found through grasping is fragile, always shadowed by fear of loss. Non-grasping opens another kind of joy, one that comes not from holding, but from appreciating. This joy is steady because it is not tied to ownership. It is found in seeing, in being, in touching life lightly. To practice this, it helps to notice the body. Grasping often shows itself in the shoulders, the jaw, the hands. When you catch yourself tightening, breathe. Let the grip soften physically, and the mind often follows. Awareness of the body becomes a tool for training awareness of the mind. Each time you relax the hold, you reinforce the habit of release before clinging hardens. What makes this teaching challenging is that grasping feels safe. To let go before holding feels risky, as if life will slip away entirely. But what you discover is that life is more generous than that. By not clinging, you actually experience more. Just as holding water tightly makes it spill from your hand, but cupping it lightly allows you to drink, so too with life. The lighter the touch, the deeper the nourishment. This is not about detachment in the sense of cold distance. Non-grasping is full engagement without imprisonment. You laugh more freely because you are not trying to make joy permanent. You love more deeply because you are not trying to own the person. You learn more openly because you are not trying to prove identity. It is not withdrawal from life, but intimacy with life, unburdened by chains. Even in hardship, this practice offers relief. When pain comes, the instinct is to grasp at its opposite, to demand it end, to clutch at escape. But when you stop grasping, you allow the pain to move. It may still hurt, but it no longer suffocates. You learn that pain, like joy, is part of the flow. By not grasping, you allow it to pass through without leaving scars of resistance. Over time, this art changes how you see everything. You begin to notice the constant reaching of the mind, and each time you soften, you taste freedom. Life becomes less about control and more about openness. Where once there was constant tension, there is now space. Where once there was fear of loss, there is now appreciation of presence. The world does not need to be grasped, because it is already here, already complete, already flowing. And so, this deeper practice unfolds quietly, reshaping your way of being. It does not shout, it does not force, it does not demand. It simply teaches you the gentle strength of living without clutching, the subtle freedom of meeting life with open hands. When the practice of not grasping begins to steady the heart, another layer of truth reveals itself. Life still delivers moments of pain, loss, rejection, illness, disappointment. No amount of clarity prevents the sting of being human, yet here lies a doorway that many overlook. Instead of resisting pain or building walls against it, there is another path, turning that raw experience into compassion. Pain that is resisted hardens into bitterness, but pain that is opened to becomes the bridge that connects you to every other living being. The first shift is in how pain is viewed. Most people see it as personal, as punishment, as something that should not be there. But when you sit quietly with discomfort, you begin to notice that what you feel is not unique. Everyone at some point aches in the same way. The sadness of loss, the fear of failure, the heaviness of loneliness, these threads are woven into the fabric of human life. Realizing this does not remove your own suffering, but it changes its meaning. It is no longer a private prison, but part of a shared reality. From that recognition, compassion naturally starts to grow. The act of softening into pain is not about indulging it or dramatizing it. It is about refusing to armor yourself against it. The armor may feel protective, but it actually isolates you, keeping you locked in your own narrative. When you drop the armor, the heart becomes porous. You begin to sense the pulse of humanity in your own hurt. This is the seed of compassion, not pity, not superiority, but genuine understanding that says, I know this place, I've walked this ground too. In Buddhist practice, pain becomes the teacher that awakens empathy. If you have suffered betrayal, you understand what countless others carry in silence. If you have felt fear, you know the trembling of others. If you have lost someone, you know the ache of separation that echoes across the world. Each wound becomes a doorway to connection, dissolving the illusion that you are alone. Instead of closing down, you lean into a wider awareness. Your suffering is not just yours, it is the shared echo of existence. This does not mean romanticizing pain. It means refusing to waste it. Pain will come whether you resist or not. The question is what you do with it. Some turn it into anger, some into despair, some into numbness. But you can also let it soften the heart. By meeting your own suffering without resistance, you develop the capacity to meet others with gentleness. You know what it is to hurt, so you no longer dismiss the hurt of others. You stop judging who deserves compassion and who does not, because you know suffering is not a moral failure but part of being alive. One of the most powerful practices that emerges from this wisdom is shifting from the thought, "Why me?" to "Why not me?" Pain is not a cosmic mistake. It is not life singling you out. It is part of the same rhythm that brings joy and beauty. This shift loosens the grip of self-pity and opens the door to perspective. You begin to see that pain is not proof of isolation but proof of belonging. You suffer because you are human, just like everyone else. That realization alone is enough to spark a deeper tenderness for yourself and for others. This transformation also alters your relationship with those around you. Instead of seeing others' struggles as burdens, you begin to recognize them as mirrors. Their pain reflects your own, and your pain reflects theirs. This shared recognition can dissolve resentment and competition. When someone lashes out in anger, you may see the wound behind it. When someone withdraws, you may sense the fear beneath it. Compassion grows because you know firsthand how fragile the human heart can be. To cultivate this, practices like Tonglen in Tibetan Buddhism offer profound tools. You breathe in the suffering yours and others, and breathe out relief, kindness, and love. At first, this feels overwhelming, but with time it shifts the way the mind holds pain. Instead of shrinking from it, you open to it. You begin to sense that you can carry suffering in a way that transforms it. You no longer fear being consumed, because the act of compassion itself becomes healing. Even physical pain can be approached in this way. Instead of tensing and resisting, you soften into awareness of it. You notice the sensations without the added layer of panic or story. Then, you widen the lens. Countless others are lying in hospital beds right now. Countless others are struggling with their bodies. In that moment, your own pain connects you to them. What once felt like isolation becomes connection. The sharpness of pain is still there, but its meaning is different. It is no longer a punishment. It is a shared language of being alive. Transforming pain into compassion also reshapes how you see strength. Strength is often portrayed as the ability to hide suffering, to pretend it does not touch you. But this kind of strength is brittle. True strength is the willingness to face pain honestly, without hardening, to let it open you instead of close you, to allow it to deepen your understanding instead of narrowing it. Such strength does not roar. It radiates quietly, like a steady flame that lights the way for others in darkness. This transformation is also a form of freedom. When you resist pain, you live in fear of it. Every difficulty becomes a threat, every change a danger. But when you meet pain as a teacher, the fear lessens. You stop running, stop hiding, stop clinging to the illusion of a painless life. Instead, you trust that even in suffering there is value, even in hurt there is wisdom. Life no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a teacher, unpredictable but generous in lessons. The compassion that arises is not limited to people. It extends to animals, to the environment, to everything that suffers under the weight of existence. When your heart has been softened by your own struggles, you can no longer ignore the struggles of the world. You see the bird with a broken wing, the tree cut down, the earth scarred. and something in you responds with care. This widening of compassion is the natural flowering of transforming your pain instead of resisting it. In silence, this wisdom becomes even clearer. When you sit with discomfort, you notice how quickly the mind wants to escape. Yet when you stay, you notice the edges begin to shift. What felt unbearable begins to soften, not because the pain vanishes, but because the mind no longer piles resistance on top of it. The simplicity of presence reveals a truth. Pain is not the enemy, resistance island. And when resistance falls away, what remains is a tender clarity that naturally moves toward love. This is not a practice of perfection. There will be times when pain feels overwhelming, when compassion seems out of reach. But even in those moments, the seed remains. Each time you open, even a little, the seed grows. Each time you choose softness over hardness, connection over isolation, the path deepens. Slowly, pain becomes less of a curse and more of a guide. It points you toward the most essential truth, that beneath all appearances, every being longs for peace, for safety, for love. In this way, your own suffering becomes the very ground of wisdom, not something to erase, not something to escape, but something to transform. Each tear, each ache, each loss carries within it the possibility of compassion. And the more you allow that possibility, the more you discover that pain, instead of breaking you, can open you into a vast and boundless heart. When pain softens into compassion, the heart begins to widen, but a new challenge quietly emerges. Even in kindness, the mind still swings between extremes. It clings to pleasure and rejects discomfort. It praises success and despises failure. It builds identities out of being right and collapses in shame when proven wrong. This constant oscillation is exhausting, and yet most people mistake it for living fully. The truth is subtler. Balance itself is freedom, and resisting that balance becomes another form of bondage. The middle way is not neutrality in the sense of indifference. It is the deep stability that comes from no longer being enslaved by opposites. You may notice how often your energy is consumed in trying to hold on to one side and avoid the other. Happiness becomes a desperate grasping at favorable conditions. Sorrow becomes an enemy to push away. But both ends of the spectrum are still chains, because clinging to one and resisting the other keeps you in constant struggle. Equanimity is the release of those chains, not by erasing experience, but by refusing to be trapped in its extremes. Consider the way craving and aversion dominate decisions. Craving whispers that if you achieve one more goal, buy one more possession, receive one more praise, then you will be satisfied. Aversion shouts that if you avoid pain, silence criticism, and protect yourself from all discomfort, then you will be safe. But neither delivers what they promise. Craving leaves you restless, always chasing. Aversion leaves you anxious, always hiding. Both bind you to cycles of tension. The middle way interrupts this cycle by showing that fulfillment lies not in chasing or avoiding, but in meeting each moment as it is, without demanding it be more or less. This does not mean life becomes dull. In fact, it becomes richer, because your experience is no longer filtered through constant judgment. Food is enjoyed not because you fear losing it or crave more, but because you are fully present with its taste. Success is appreciated without the pressure of making it define your worth. Failure is seen without the collapse of identity. Joy and sorrow both move through you, but neither controls you. The middle way allows you to feel everything without being imprisoned by any of it. Equanimity also dissolves the illusion of control. When you live at the mercy of extremes, you feel that life must be manipulated constantly to keep balance. You try to hoard happiness, avoid suffering, and shape every moment to your desire. But this only leads to exhaustion, because no one can master every variable of existence. The middle way offers another kind of mastery, not over the world, but over your own reactions. When balance is cultivated within, the turbulence of external events has less power to shake you. This path also frees you from the trap of self-definition. The mind loves to categorize, good or bad, worthy or unworthy, successful or failed. But these categories are shifting sands. What is praised today is criticized tomorrow. What feels secure now dissolves later. By walking the middle way, you release the need to fix yourself at one pole of identity. You discover a deeper freedom in being undefended, fluid, responsive to the present moment, rather than chained to labels. Equanimity is not indifference to injustice or passivity in the face of suffering. On the contrary, it is the very ground from which wise action emerges. When you are caught in extremes, anger blinds, judgment or attachment clouds clarity. When you stand in balance, you see more clearly. You can respond without being consumed. Compassion rooted in equanimity is steady. It does not burn out because it is not fueled by extremes of rage or attachment. It flows with a strength that is sustainable. Daily life offers endless opportunities to practice this. When someone criticizes you, notice the urge to collapse in shame or retaliate in anger. The middle way is neither submission nor aggression, but the calm clarity of hearing without being shattered. When success comes, notice the urge to inflate, to cling, to make it proof of your worth. The middle way is appreciation without intoxication. When loss arrives, notice the urge to despair. The middle way is grieving without drowning, allowing the waves to pass without dragging you under. One of the deepest insights of this teaching is that extremes are seductive because they offer the illusion of certainty. Clinging to pleasure feels certain, hating pain feels certain. But life itself is never certain, and so extremes always collapse eventually. The middle way is the courage to live in that uncertainty without collapsing into craving or aversion. It is the steadiness of a mountain that remains rooted even as storms pass across its surface. The practice begins by observing your own swings. Notice how quickly joy turns into the fear of losing it. Notice how pain turns into resentment of its presence. Each observation is a chance to step back and rest in balance. At first, this balance feels fragile, but with practice it strengthens. Equanimity is like a muscle. Each time you return to center, you build capacity. Over time, the pull of extremes weakens, and your center of gravity becomes steady. This teaching also reveals the hidden suffering in even positive extremes. People often cling to happiness without realizing that the clinging itself is the seed of sorrow. When you are desperate for joy to remain, you cannot fully enjoy it. You are haunted by its impermanence. But when equanimity is present, joy can be tasted fully because you are not attached to its duration. It is free to come and go, and you are free with it. Equanimity also enriches love. Without balance, love can turn into attachment or control, demanding constant reassurance or fearing abandonment. With equanimity, love becomes freer, less about possession and more about presence. You can care deeply without collapsing when circumstances change. You can give without expectation and receive without clinging. This balance makes love not weaker but stronger because it is not chained to fear. Even the pursuit of spiritual growth can fall into extremes. Some chase bliss states, clinging to experiences of calm or ecstasy. Others fall into despair when the mind is restless or distracted. The middle way cuts through both. Meditation is not about clinging to pleasant states or resisting unpleasant ones. It is about meeting each state with balance, knowing that both will pass. This steadiness allows genuine insight to arise, unclouded by grasping or aversion. In silence, equanimity reveals itself as spaciousness. Thoughts still arise, emotions still surge, but you are no longer pulled helplessly between them. There is a stable ground underneath, a quiet center that watches without being swept away. From this center, peace emerges not as absence of experience, but as freedom within experience. This is the heart of the middle way. To walk steadily between extremes, not by avoiding them, but by no longer being controlled by them. Over time, this practice transforms your relationship with life itself. Where once every change felt like a threat, now each moment is simply part of the balance. Gain and loss, joy and sorrow, praise and blame, all become movements in a larger rhythm. You no longer resist balance itself, no longer treat it as a fragile state to protect. Instead, balance becomes your natural way of being, a quiet strength that carries you through every storm. And as this balance deepens, the tension of opposites begins to dissolve. Life no longer feels like a tug-of-war between desire and fear, pleasure and pain, success and failure. It feels like a vast field where everything arises and passes in its time. You remain steady, rooted, free from the exhausting pull of extremes. In this freedom, equanimity reveals its true gift, a peace that is not dependent on conditions, a clarity that no storm can shake. When balance begins to steady the heart, you start to see patterns that once felt overwhelming. Life doesn't just swing between opposites, it moves in repeating cycles. Joy rises, joy falls. Peace arrives, then restlessness returns. You work hard to fix one problem, and another appears. At first, this rhythm feels like punishment, as though you are trapped in a wheel you cannot escape. Yet Buddhist wisdom reveals something radical. The cycle itself is not your prison, but your teacher. Samsara, the endless turning of experiences, is not meant to crush you, it is meant to awaken you. Pain is never random, it points to where clinging is strongest, where illusion still holds sway. When you lose something you thought would last forever, the ache exposes your attachment to permanence. When you find yourself repeating the same mistakes, the frustration reveals how deeply old habits grip you. Samsara is relentless, not because life is cruel, but because it refuses to let you rest in illusion. Every cycle is a lesson written in the language of experience, waiting for your attention. The mind often resists this truth. It longs for a final escape, a permanent state where suffering never returns. But running away from samsara is like running away from your own shadow. The very cycles you wish to avoid are the ones that contain the keys to freedom. Each repetition is an invitation. Will you respond with awareness this time, or will you fall back into old patterns? Samsara will keep presenting the lesson until it is learned. This is not punishment, but compassion disguised as difficulty. Consider the rhythm of relationships. People enter your life, bring joy or conflict, and eventually change or leave. Each time this happens, you are faced with the same question: will you cling and suffer, or will you see the truth of impermanence and love without possession? The cycle of connection and loss is not a trap. It is a constant teaching in how to open your heart without chains. Work and ambition follow a similar cycle. You strive, succeed, feel satisfied for a while, then restlessness creeps in again. Instead of seeing this as failure, you can recognize it as samsara showing you the truth. External achievements can never offer permanent fulfillment. The cycle reveals where true contentment must be sought, not in chasing conditions, but in cultivating inner stability. Even your thoughts move in circles. Worries repeat, desires replay, regrets resurface. The untrained mind is like a wheel spinning endlessly. But when you begin to watch, you see that the wheel itself is the teacher. Every recurring thought shows you where attachment still hides, where fear still lingers, where craving still burns. The cycle is not meaningless. It is the mirror of your own unfinished lessons. Samsara also teaches humility. You may think you have conquered anger, only to find it rise again in a new situation. You may feel you have outgrown attachment, only to discover it clings in subtler forms. These returns are not failures. They are reminders that growth is not linear. Wisdom deepens through repetition, through being tested again and again until the insight becomes unshakable. Each cycle refines you, like a stone polished smooth by the constant turning of the river. To approach samsara as a teacher, you must shift how you respond to difficulty. Instead of asking, "How do I escape this?" you begin to ask, "What is this showing me?" The pain of rejection may reveal the places where you still seek approval. The stress of failure may expose the identity you have built on success. The cycle continues until you see clearly that what you chase or resist cannot give you lasting peace. In this way, samsara does not imprison you, it liberates you through relentless honesty. This view also dissolves resentment. When life feels like an endless series of setbacks, bitterness grows. But when you see each return as part of a larger teaching, the bitterness softens. You stop cursing the wheel and start listening to it. Instead of being dragged by samsara, you begin to walk alongside it, attentive to its lessons. What once felt like endless punishment becomes the very ground of wisdom. In meditation, this shift becomes vivid. Restlessness arises, then fades, then arises again. Thoughts appear, vanish, reappear. The cycle of samsara is playing out in real time within your own mind. At first, this is frustrating, but then you begin to see the repetition itself is the teacher. Each cycle offers the chance to meet the moment with awareness instead of resistance. Slowly, the mind learns that freedom is not in stopping the wheel, but in no longer being bound by it. This perspective also changes how you see others. Instead of judging them for repeating mistakes, you recognize that they too are walking the wheel of samsara. Their anger, greed, or fear is simply their lesson repeating, just as yours repeats. Compassion grows because you see the shared struggle. No one is exempt from the turning of the wheel, but everyone is invited to learn from it. Samsara even reveals the nature of joy. Pleasure rises and falls, just like pain. To cling to it is to suffer, but to reject it is to deny part of life. The lesson is not to escape joy, but to experience it fully without illusion. You savor it, knowing it will pass, and in that very knowing you are free. Joy becomes lighter, purer, because it is no longer chained to the demand that it remain. The cycles also teach patience. Transformation does not happen in a single moment of insight. It happens through the slow turning of experience, again and again, until the truth sinks deeply into the heart. Like seasons returning each year, samsara returns with familiar lessons. Each time you meet them with awareness, the grip loosens. Each return is another chance to practice, another step toward wisdom. Perhaps the greatest lesson samsara offers is that liberation is not found by running away, but by turning inward. The cycles will not stop. What changes is your relationship with them. When you stop resisting, stop longing for escape, you begin to see that samsara and nirvana are not two separate worlds, but two ways of seeing the same world. One sees cycles as prisons, the other sees them as teachers. The difference is awareness. This is why Buddhist masters sometimes smile at difficulties. They know that each return is not a curse, but a chance to grow. They see the wisdom hidden in the repetition. They do not waste energy wishing for a life without cycles, because they understand that cycles are the very mechanism of awakening. What once felt like a trap is revealed as a path. As this perspective deepens, life feels less like a battle and more like a classroom. Every joy and sorrow, every rise and fall, every gain and loss becomes a lesson. The wheel keeps turning, but you are no longer crushed beneath it. You are learning, evolving, awakening. Samsara is still there, but it has changed its role. No longer the jailer, it has become the teacher, patient and relentless, guiding you toward freedom. When the wheel of samsara is no longer feared as a prison, but welcomed as a teacher, something even subtler begins to appear. The very cycles that once caused despair point to a truth that underlies everything. Nothing stays the same. What arises will pass, what is born will fade, what begins will end. For most, this truth feels unbearable, a reminder of loss and fragility. Yet seen clearly, Impermanence is not a threat, but a companion. It is the force that keeps life vivid, tender, and precious. To be awake is to see change not as the enemy, but as the gentle friend that makes every moment matter. Impermanence is present in everything you touch, from the fleeting taste of food to the shifting seasons outside your window. You cannot hold a moment still, no matter how tightly you grasp, and this is not a defect of life, but its essence. Without impermanence, growth would be impossible. Without endings, there would be no beginnings. Every joy you have known was born of change. Every lesson you have learned carved from the passing of one stage into another. To fear impermanence is to fear the very source of renewal. Yet fear arises because the mind equates change with loss. You want the beautiful to last forever, and you recoil when it slips away. But if beauty never faded, it would lose its intensity. The bloom of a flower is precious because it does not endure. The laughter of a child touches the heart because it belongs to a stage that cannot return. Love feels profound because you know it is not guaranteed. Endings give flavor to beginnings. To live with awareness of impermanence is to see that every moment shines precisely because it is unrepeatable. This insight is not meant to stay as poetry, but to reshape your relationship with life. When you know that time is short, you stop postponing what matters. Words of kindness are spoken now, not someday. Gratitude is expressed today, not in some imagined future. You forgive more easily because you understand that both you and the other are passing, and anger wastes the little time you share. Awareness of impermanence sharpens priorities, cutting through distraction and revealing what truly deserves your attention. Even suffering changes under this view. Pain may feel endless when you are in the midst of it, but impermanence ensures it will shift. The intensity will fade, the edges will soften, the context will evolve. This knowledge brings resilience. You endure not by denial, but by trusting the truth of change. Just as joy passes, so does sorrow. No state, however heavy, is final. Impermanence is the promise that nothing will bind you forever. The practice of remembering impermanence can be woven into ordinary life. When drinking a cup of tea, notice its warmth, knowing it will cool. When speaking with a loved one, feel the conversation as unique, knowing it cannot be repeated in exactly the same way. When walking outside, recognize the sky, the air, the season as a moment that will never return. Instead of breeding sadness, this awareness deepens presence. You stop sleepwalking through experience and begin to taste life fully. Impermanence also teaches humility. Much of human suffering comes from the illusion of control, the belief that you can secure permanence through effort, wealth, or power. But no empire, no fortune, no body has ever defeated time. Everything shifts, and when you accept this, arrogance softens. You no longer waste energy pretending to be invincible. Instead, you align yourself with the rhythm of change. This humility is not weakness, but wisdom, a quiet acceptance of life's true nature. In relationships, impermanence transforms how you love. Instead of clinging, you cherish. Instead of fearing loss, you honor the time you have. Knowing that people change, you stop demanding they remain fixed for your comfort. You allow them to grow, to evolve, even to leave, without turning love into possession. This freedom makes love deeper because it is rooted not in denial of change, but in full awareness of it. Every embrace, every conversation, every glance becomes sacred because it will not come again in the same way. Awareness of impermanence also dissolves the illusion of boredom. When you look closely, no two moments are identical. The breath you take now is not the breath you took a moment ago. The sound in the room is not the same as yesterday. Even the thoughts passing through your mind are constantly shifting. Boredom arises only when you fail to notice the endless novelty of change. Impermanence reveals the world as ever-renewing, a stream of freshness waiting to be seen. Meditation deepens this realization. As you sit, sensations rise and fall, thoughts appear and vanish, emotions surge and subside. You see directly that nothing lingers. Even discomfort, when observed with patience, transforms. This practice is not just about calm, but about insight. By watching impermanence unfold moment by moment, you train yourself to stop clinging to what cannot be held. Slowly, fear of endings gives way to trust in the flow. Impermanence also reveals the equality of all beings. Everyone you meet is subject to the same law. The wealthy and the poor, the strong and the weak, the young and the old, all are carried by time. This recognition softens pride and envy alike. You stop measuring worth by temporary conditions and begin to see the shared vulnerability that unites everyone. Compassion arises naturally because you know that beneath all appearances, each life is fragile, each breath uncertain. Even death, the greatest reminder of impermanence, changes its meaning under this light. Instead of seeing it as an intrusion, you see it as the final expression of the same truth that has shaped every moment. Death is not separate from life, but woven into it. Every ending makes room for a beginning. Every departure nourishes what comes after. When you live with this awareness, fear loosens. You do not need to deny mortality or hide from it. Instead, you let it sharpen your appreciation of being alive. The gifts of impermanence extend beyond the personal. Entire cultures, landscapes, and civilizations rise and fall. When you see this, you stop clinging to the illusion that history can be frozen. You respect the fleeting beauty of each era without demanding it last forever. This perspective breeds adaptability. You are less shaken by societal change because you know it is part of the same rhythm that governs every level of existence. There is also freedom in creativity. Art, music, and stories are beautiful precisely because they capture fleeting expressions. A song ends, a painting fades, a performance dissolves into memory. If they were permanent, they would lose their poignancy. Impermanence is not an obstacle to beauty, it is its source. When you create with this awareness, you stop fearing the transience of your work. You offer it fully. Knowing its impermanence is what makes it alive. Practicing with impermanence does not mean becoming detached from life. It means entering more deeply into it. Instead of standing back in fear of endings, you step forward with openness. You allow yourself to feel, to risk, to love, because you no longer demand guarantees. Endings do not diminish the worth of beginnings, they give them meaning. To embrace impermanence is to embrace life without conditions. This wisdom also transforms ambition. Many chase achievements believing they will last forever, but every accomplishment, no matter how grand, will fade in memory. Knowing this does not make effort meaningless, it makes it purer. You act not to carve permanence, but to contribute, to express, to serve in the moment. Success and failure both become lighter because neither defines you permanently. The freedom of impermanence allows you to act wholeheartedly without being chained to outcomes. Over time, living with impermanence creates a gentle courage. You face uncertainty not with denial but with trust. You accept change not as loss but as the very pulse of existence. You stop wasting energy on the impossible task of freezing time and instead learn to dance with it. This courage is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and resilient. It carries you through grief, through joy, through every transition, with a heart that remains open. In the end, impermanence is not a threat to be feared, but a friend to be trusted. It reminds you that nothing is static, nothing is final, nothing is beyond transformation. By walking with this friend, you awaken to the truth that every moment is alive, radiant, and unrepeatable. And in that awakening, you discover a freedom deeper than security, the freedom to live fully, knowing that everything you touch, everything you love, everything you experience is infinitely precious because it will not come again. When impermanence is welcomed as a companion rather than feared as an enemy, the mind begins to soften. You see how every joy and sorrow passes, how each moment is unrepeatable and therefore precious. Yet even with this awareness, another subtle habit remains: the reflex to divide life into categories of good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant, wanted and unwanted. This constant labeling keeps you chained to judgment, always chasing one side and resisting the other. True freedom begins when you see through this reflex and step into the radical power of non-preference. Non-preference does not mean apathy or numbness. It is not a withdrawal from life or a refusal to care. It is the quiet strength of meeting every experience without stamping it with approval or rejection. It is the recognition that experiences themselves are not the problem. It is the mind's habit of dividing them that creates suffering. When you stop calling one moment a blessing and another a curse, you begin to rest in a deeper peace that is not dependent on conditions. Much of daily stress arises not from the events themselves, but from the judgments layered on top. A sudden rain is neither good nor bad, yet the mind declares it an inconvenience if you wanted sun, or a relief if you wanted cool air. The event is neutral, but preference distorts it. Non-preference allows you to meet the rain as rain, without resistance, without clinging. This openness makes space for gratitude, for learning, for simply being present. The power of non-preference shows itself most clearly in discomfort. When something unpleasant happens, the mind rushes to label it bad and then fights against it. This double burden intensifies the pain. But when you drop the label, you allow the experience to be what it island. You may still feel pain, but without the resistance of judgment, the pain is lighter. It passes more freely, leaving fewer scars. Even joy becomes richer when freed from preference. Usually, pleasure is shadowed by the fear of its loss. You cling tightly because you have judged it good and do not want it to end. Yet in clinging, you miss the very joy you want to preserve. Non-preference lets you enjoy fully without attachment. The experience can arise, unfold, and fade without chains. This kind of joy is purer because it is not entangled with fear. The habit of preference runs deep, often unnoticed. It colors how you see people, events, even yourself. You praise qualities you like and condemn those you dislike. You measure yourself by successes labeled good and failures labeled bad. But this measuring creates a fragile identity, always swinging with circumstances. When you release preference, self-image softens. You are no longer defined by shifting judgments, but grounded in something steadier, the simple presence of being. Non-preference also brings freedom in relationships. Much conflict arises from demanding that others conform to your preferences. You label certain behaviors as acceptable and others as intolerable, then struggle when people do not match your expectations. By loosening this grip, you begin to meet others as they are, without constant judgment. This does not mean tolerating harm, but it does mean dropping the unnecessary battles created by preference. Relationships become lighter, more spacious, more compassionate. In practice, non-preference is cultivated through awareness. Each time you catch the mind labeling, "This is good, this is bad," pause. Notice the habit. Ask yourself if the judgment adds anything to the raw experience, or if it only creates tension. Gradually, you learn to let the moment stand on its own, unburdened by your commentary. This does not numb you, it sharpens your presence. You see more clearly when you are not clouded by constant evaluation. This wisdom has roots in deep compassion. When you stop labeling experiences, you also stop labeling people as worthy or unworthy, lovable or unlovable. You see them not through the filter of preference, but through the truth of their humanity. Everyone becomes easier to approach, easier to understand, because you are not dividing the world into camps of approval and rejection. Compassion expands naturally when the walls of preference fall away. Even your relationship with time changes. The mind labels certain moments as valuable and others as wasted, but every moment is simply part of the unfolding. Waiting in line, sitting in silence, feeling bored, These are often condemned as bad, yet in non-preference, they are as full as any other moment. Life ceases to be divided into highlights and throwaways. It becomes continuous, whole, sacred in its entirety. Non-preference also heals the restless pursuit of perfection. The constant labeling of actions as successes or failures fuels anxiety. By dropping the labels, you act with clarity and sincerity, but without obsession. You do your best, and the outcome is simply what it island. This frees you from the endless cycle of self-congratulation and self-condemnation. You begin to trust the process rather than chasing or fearing results. Meditation offers a direct way to taste this. As thoughts arise, the mind immediately labels some as useful and others as distractions. But when you observe without preference, every thought becomes part of the practice. Even restlessness becomes the object of awareness, neither good nor bad, simply present. This dissolves frustration and deepens patience. The mind no longer battles itself. It rests in openness. The radical nature of non-preference lies in its ability to dismantle duality. Most of life is lived in the tension of opposites, success and failure, pleasure and pain, praise and blame. By dropping preference, you no longer live as a prisoner of these pairs. You see that life is not a ledger of gains and losses, but a flow of experiences. Some are pleasant, some are difficult, but none need to define you. This freedom is profound because it releases you from the constant struggle to arrange the world according to your desires. This practice does not make you passive, it makes you wise. Without the distortion of preference, you can act more effectively. Decisions are no longer clouded by fear of bad outcomes or obsession with good ones. You respond to reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. This clarity strengthens action because it is grounded in truth rather than judgment. Over time, non-preference transforms even how you experience yourself. You stop dividing your inner world into acceptable and unacceptable parts. Thoughts, emotions, memories, all are allowed to arise without being pushed away or clung to. This inner acceptance breeds peace. You no longer waste energy fighting yourself. Instead, you live in harmony with your own mind, free from the constant battle of preference. What begins as a subtle shift in perception becomes a profound liberation. Life no longer feels like a constant evaluation. You are no longer trapped in the exhausting game of chasing what is good and fleeing what is bad. Instead, you rest in a deeper openness where every moment is welcomed without condition. This is the radical power of non-preference, freedom that cannot be taken away because it does not depend on circumstances but on the simple choice to let life be as it island. When the mind begins to loosen its grip on constant labeling, when the habit of dividing everything into good and bad starts to dissolve, a new kind of stillness appears. Life no longer feels like a constant trial to be judged, and in that space, something quieter becomes noticeable: the breath. It has always been there, steady and faithful, yet often ignored. Beneath every thought, beneath every emotion, the rhythm of inhale and exhale carries on without demand. And within this rhythm lies one of the most profound teachings: surrender. Breathing shows you what it means to receive without clinging and release without resistance. Each inhale is a gift, given freely by life itself, and each exhale is a letting go, effortless and natural. You cannot hold a breath forever, no matter how much you try. If you resist exhaling, the body trembles, and suffering begins. If you refuse to inhale, the same truth appears. Breathing is the simplest mirror of the law you resist in daily life. To live is to accept and to let go. This truth is often overlooked because breathing seems too ordinary, too simple. Yet its simplicity is its power. Within it lies a complete teaching on how to live without resistance. The inhale shows the openness required to receive, to welcome life, sensations, experiences, without blocking them. The exhale shows the wisdom of release, to let what has entered flow back out without clinging. Together, they reveal balance, the dance of taking in and giving back, the rhythm of surrender. When you sit quietly and pay attention to breathing, you notice that it is always changing. Sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, sometimes smooth, sometimes rough. Yet whatever its form, it continues. It teaches you that surrender does not mean perfection, it means allowing. The breath does not resist its own unevenness, it simply adjusts, adapts, continues. This is the essence of surrender, to let life move through you without hardening against it. Breathing also teaches humility. You do not control the air you receive. It is offered by the world around you. Trees, plants, oceans, all participate in giving you each inhale. Every breath is proof of interconnection. You are not separate, not self-sufficient, but woven into a larger rhythm. To recognize this is to drop the illusion of absolute control and rest in the truth of dependence. Surrender begins when pride gives way to gratitude. In daily life, this teaching is profound. When challenges arise, the instinct is to tighten, to resist, to block what feels overwhelming. But when you return to the breath, you are reminded of another way. You inhale, allowing even the difficulty to be present. You exhale, releasing the tension that clings to it. The problem may remain, but your relationship with it shifts. Instead of fighting, you flow with it, just as the breath flows regardless of circumstance. Surrender does not mean giving up, it means giving over. It is the trust that life knows how to move if you stop interfering. The breath is proof of this trust. Without your constant control, it continues. Without your demand, it sustains you. Each cycle shows you that release is not death but renewal, that letting go does not mean loss but the space for the next gift to arrive. When you see this, surrender no longer feels like weakness but like alignment with the deepest truth of existence. Meditation deepens this realization. As you sit with the breath, thoughts will arise, emotions will pull, distractions will come. The usual response is to chase or resist them. But when you anchor in breathing, you learn to let them pass. Just as you inhale and exhale without clinging, you let thoughts enter and leave. The breath trains the mind in surrender, teaching not through philosophy but through direct experience. Over time, the mind softens, and surrender becomes not an effort but a way of being. This teaching reaches even further. Breathing shows that surrender is not only personal but universal. Every inhale is part of a cycle larger than you air, circulating through forests, winds crossing oceans, the planet's atmosphere moving in rhythms far beyond your control. Each exhale returns to that cycle, contributing to it. You are not a separate being hoarding life. You are a participant in a vast exchange. Surrender means recognizing your place within this whole, dropping the illusion of isolation. In relationships, the breath's wisdom becomes guidance. To receive another person is like inhaling openness, acceptance, allowing them to be as they are. To let them go when life calls for it is like exhaling, release, trust, freedom. When you resist either, you suffer. If you cling to someone who needs to move on, the relationship suffocates. If you refuse to let someone in, loneliness hardens. But when you breathe with the rhythm of connection and release, love becomes freer, less entangled, more alive. Breathing also transforms fear. Much fear is rooted in the unknown, in the uncertainty of what comes next. But the breath teaches that the unknown is not to be feared. It is the very source of life. Each inhale arrives without guarantee, and yet it comes, again and again. Each exhale leaves without knowing what will follow, yet the next breath returns. To surrender to this rhythm is to trust the flow of existence, even when outcomes are uncertain. This surrender can be practiced at any moment. In anger, breathe. In sadness, breathe. In confusion, breathe. Each cycle reminds you to receive what is here without blocking it, to release what has passed without clinging. Slowly, this rhythm seeps into every part of life. You argue less with reality because you have learned to exhale. You fear less of the future because you have learned to inhale. Breathing becomes not just a bodily function but a living prayer of surrender. Even in facing death, the breath carries wisdom. The final exhale is not failure, but the completion of the same rhythm that sustained you all your life. To surrender into that moment is to recognize that every breath was preparing you for it. The practice of letting go each time you exhale becomes the training for the ultimate surrender. Death is not an interruption of life's rhythm, but its natural resolution. What makes this teaching radical is its simplicity. You do not need complex rituals or philosophies to learn surrender. It is taught in every breath you take. You carry the practice within you at all times. The only requirement is attention, the willingness to notice what has always been there. From that noticing, surrender becomes natural, not as an idea but as the very rhythm of your existence. Over time, the breath teaches you that surrender is not something you achieve once and for all. It is a practice renewed with every cycle. Each inhale invites trust. Each exhale invites release. Together, they weave a life lived without constant resistance. In this way, breathing ceases to be ordinary. It becomes the most intimate teacher, guiding you gently into the freedom of surrender, moment by moment, breath by breath. When the breath begins to teach you surrender, you see how life moves more easily when you stop forcing. Inhaling and exhaling become reminders that clinging is unnecessary and resistance is painful. Yet even within this rhythm, there is something that continues to stir, the self that insists on being central. The ego whispers, "This is my breath, my peace, my progress." And so the next lesson reveals itself to loosen the hold of ego, not in grand mystical visions, but in the smallest details of daily life. Ego death is often spoken of in terms of extraordinary experiences, visions, revelations, altered states that dissolve the sense of self. But the most enduring form of freedom does not appear in moments that feel beyond this world. It arises in the humble, ordinary places where ego would prefer to dominate unnoticed. Each time pride softens, each time defensiveness dissolves, each time self-importance steps aside, a little death of ego occurs. And it is in these small deaths that true liberation unfolds. One of the clearest mirrors of ego is correction. When someone points out a mistake, a wave rises inside. The urge to defend, to argue, to cover up. That wave is ego struggling to preserve its image. To allow correction without resistance is to let ego die a little. You discover that being wrong is not the end of the world, that identity is not shattered by imperfection. In fact, you grow lighter, freer, because you are no longer wasting energy on defending an image that was never solid. Another ordinary moment of ego death happens in tasks so simple they seem invisible. Washing dishes, sweeping the floor, folding laundry. The ego often resists these, declaring them beneath its importance. Yet when you meet them with humility, you step outside the story of, "I am too good for this." You simply participate, fully, quietly. In those moments, the self that demands recognition fades, and what remains is presence. The task becomes complete in itself, without need for validation. Ego thrives on comparison. It measures constantly, better or worse, higher or lower, superior or inferior. But in the rhythm of everyday life, opportunities arise to release this constant measuring. Standing in a line, sitting in traffic, working alongside others, these moments invite you to stop calculating your worth against anyone else. When you stop comparing, the ego loses one of its favorite games. What arises instead is contentment, the simplicity of being where you are, without needing to prove yourself. The death of ego is also revealed in silence. In conversations, the urge often arises to interrupt, to show knowledge, to win approval. Yet when you let others speak without rushing to insert yourself, the ego that craves attention loosens. You listen more deeply, not as a performance but as genuine presence. In silence, the ego fades because it cannot dominate. What remains is connection unclouded by self-centeredness. This practice extends to moments of failure. Ego resists failure fiercely, equating it with unworthiness. But when you experience failure without collapsing into shame, you see through the ego's illusion. Failure becomes feedback, not identity. You are not destroyed by mistakes because you are no longer identified with them. This shift is a profound death of ego, realizing that who you are is not limited to the roles you succeed or fail in. Even joy contains opportunities for ego death. When something beautiful arises, laughter, music, love, ego rushes to make it yours, to claim credit, to secure it as part of your story. But when you allow joy to be simply joy, without needing to own it, you step out of ego. The experience becomes purer because it is no longer tangled with possession. You discover that happiness is deepest when it is not attached to me or mine. The ego also hides in the need for recognition. Praise feels intoxicating because it feeds the self-image. But when you learn to do good without being seen, the ego loses its grip. Acts of kindness, done quietly, efforts made without announcement, generosity given without acknowledgement. These moments strip away the self's hunger for validation. What remains is the simple joy of doing, unburdened by the need to be admired. Meditation reveals the ego's patterns in stark clarity. Thoughts arise constantly that center around I, my plans, my worries, my achievements, my failures. Watching them without clinging shows you how the ego constructs itself moment by moment. Each time you let a thought pass without identifying with it, the ego dissolves a little. This dissolution is not dramatic, it is gentle, cumulative. Over time, the grip of self-centered thinking weakens and spaciousness expands. Daily conflicts also provide fertile ground for ego death. Arguments often escalate not because of the content, but because ego cannot bear to lose. To step back, to let go of the need to be right, is to let ego die. This does not mean silencing yourself when truth is important, but it means dropping the insistence on winning. Peace becomes more valuable than victory. Each time you choose peace over pride, the ego shrinks. Even gratitude undermines the ego. Ego thrives on the story that you alone are the source of your success. Gratitude reminds you that countless conditions support your life: the work of others, the gifts of nature, the kindness of strangers. Acknowledging this dissolves the illusion of independence. Ego resists gratitude because it threatens its claim to supremacy. But the more you practice it, the less space ego has to dominate. Ego death in daily life is not about annihilating the self, but about loosening its tyranny. The self still functions, still makes choices, still acts, but it no longer demands to be the center of the universe. Humility replaces arrogance, openness replaces defensiveness, service replaces self-importance. These small deaths accumulate into a freedom far greater than any mystical vision. The beauty of this practice is that opportunities arise constantly. Each correction, each chore, each conversation, each setback is an invitation to step out of ego's grip. You do not need extraordinary conditions to experience liberation. You need only attention, the willingness to notice where ego clings, and the courage to let it loosen. Over time, this way of living reshapes your entire sense of identity. You stop being bound by the fragile story of who you think you are. You stop exhausting yourself defending an image that cannot last. Instead, you live more lightly, more freely, more authentically. Ego death in everyday moments does not erase you. It liberates you from the burden of constant self-concern. And in that liberation, life becomes clearer, softer, and infinitely more spacious. When the ego begins to loosen its grip in the small details of daily life, a new kind of clarity arises. You notice that the very things you once wished would disappear, the interruptions, the challenges, the setbacks, are still present. Life continues to place obstacles in your path, but with a softer ego, you begin to see them differently. They are not only difficulties to endure or barriers to remove, they are teachers, precise and relentless, shaping you in ways comfort never could. What once felt like punishment begins to reveal itself as instruction. Obstacles have a way of exposing the raw truth of where you still resist. A harsh word stings because pride remains fragile. A failure crushes you because identity is still tied to achievement. An illness unsettles you because control is still clung to tightly. Without obstacles, these attachments might remain hidden. With them, everything comes to the surface. This is the first gift. Obstacles reveal what is concealed, and in doing so, they show you where the work of freedom still lies. The mind often believes that progress means a smooth road, but smooth roads rarely teach. It is the uneven paths, the unexpected storms, the moments that throw you off balance, that strengthen awareness and humility. When you meet resistance with openness, you discover that every obstacle is pointing you toward deeper wisdom. It is never random, never meaningless. It is life holding up a mirror, saying, "Here is where you tighten, here is where you cling, here is where you can learn to let go." One way to see this is through relationships. The people who challenge you the most, who frustrate you, who trigger anger or fear, are often the greatest teachers. They expose the very parts of yourself you wish to ignore. Without them, you might believe you are patient, compassionate, steady. With them, you see the limits of that patience, the cracks in that compassion, the edges of that steadiness. If you resist them, you remain stuck. If you learn from them, you grow. They become the unwitting guides of your transformation. The same applies to failure. Failure is often dreaded, avoided at all costs. But when it comes, it strips away illusions. It reveals what you expected from life, what you demanded, what you feared. Failure teaches humility, the recognition that you are not above mistakes, that you are not separate from imperfection. It teaches resilience, the ability to stand up again when the story you wanted collapses. And it teaches trust, the faith that meaning is not destroyed by disappointment. Failure, when seen as a teacher, becomes a gateway to freedom rather than a prison of shame. Physical pain also offers lessons that comfort cannot. It shows you how quickly the mind resists discomfort, how instinctively you tighten against what you cannot control. Yet pain can teach patience, endurance, and compassion. When you meet your own pain honestly, you are better able to understand the suffering of others. The body's limits remind you of impermanence and interdependence. Pain does not need to be romanticized, but when it is accepted as teacher, it loses its power to harden you. Instead, it softens the heart. Even the small daily frustrations, the traffic jam, the delay, the broken object can become Dharma doors. They interrupt the flow of preference, forcing you to face reality as it is rather than as you want it to be. Each irritation is an invitation to practice patience, to notice the rise of anger, to breathe into surrender. These small lessons accumulate, training the mind to meet larger challenges with steadiness. What makes obstacles powerful teachers is that they break the illusion of control. The ego thrives on believing it can arrange life according to its will. Obstacles shatter that illusion again and again. At first, this feels like defeat, but with practice, you begin to see it as liberation. You no longer waste energy fighting the impossible task of controlling every condition. You accept that difficulty is part of the path, not a deviation from it. This acceptance itself is freedom. Meditation provides a direct laboratory for this truth. Distractions, restlessness, sleepiness, all feel like obstacles to stillness. But when you stop resisting them, they become teachers. Restlessness shows you the mind's craving for movement. Sleepiness shows you the pull of dullness. Distraction shows you the habit of wandering. By observing them, you learn not to push them away, but to use them as mirrors. Each so-called obstacle becomes part of the practice, refining awareness rather than blocking it. The radical shift comes when you begin to welcome obstacles rather than resent them. This does not mean seeking out suffering, but it does mean recognizing that when it arrives, it brings with it an opportunity. Every resistance you face is a doorway. To step through that doorway is to learn something that comfort would never teach you. The more you see this, the less you fear difficulty. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What is this showing me?" That question alone transforms the obstacle into a teacher. This shift also cultivates compassion. When you see your own obstacles as teachers, you stop envying those who seem to have easy lives. You recognize that everyone faces their own lessons, even if hidden. You also stop judging those who struggle, because you understand that struggle itself is part of learning. Compassion expands because you see obstacles not as punishments, but as universal experiences shaping everyone in their own way. Obstacles also teach patience with time. Progress is rarely instant. The same challenges may appear again and again, testing you repeatedly. This repetition is not failure, but reinforcement. Just as a muscle is strengthened through resistance, the mind is strengthened through repeated trials. Each return of the obstacle deepens your capacity to meet it with awareness. Over time, what once overwhelmed you becomes manageable, even peaceful. The beauty of this teaching is that it requires no special conditions. Life itself provides the curriculum. Every difficulty is a lesson, every resistance a teacher. The question is whether you meet them with resentment or with openness. If you resist, you remain bound. If you welcome, you are freed. This is the essence of seeing obstacles as Dharma doors. They open into wisdom precisely where you once believed you were blocked. Gradually, this way of living transforms your relationship with the entire path. You stop seeking a life without obstacles and start seeking to learn from whatever arises. The path ceases to be a straight road to an imagined peace and becomes an unfolding journey where every twist, every stone, every storm is part of the teaching. Freedom is not found in avoiding obstacles, but in embracing them as part of the way. And so, each challenge becomes less frightening. Each failure becomes less devastating. Each pain becomes less isolating. Obstacles remain, but their meaning changes. They are no longer punishments or interruptions. They are teachers, patient and persistent, guiding you toward a freedom you might never have chosen on your own. In this light, resistance itself becomes the very doorway to awakening. When obstacles begin to reveal themselves as teachers instead of enemies, another layer of the path opens. You start to see that the external world rarely calms itself for your benefit. Noise continues, demands press in, responsibilities multiply, and chaos moves like weather through your days. Yet in the middle of this constant turbulence, there is something that does not move. A silence untouched by noise, a stillness unshaken by movement. To discover this is to stop resisting life, not by escaping it, but by resting within it. The instinct when surrounded by chaos is to try to control it. You attempt to silence the noise, manage the people, arrange the circumstances, so that peace will finally arrive. But even if you succeed briefly, the chaos soon returns in another form. Real peace does not come from fixing the world outside. It comes from touching the stillness that exists inside, always present, waiting beneath the surface of distraction. This inner stillness is not the absence of sound or motion. It is the space in which sound and motion appear. Even in the middle of a crowded street, you can notice it. Beneath the horns, the voices, the footsteps, there is awareness silent, steady, untouched. It is like the depth of the ocean beneath crashing waves. The surface may roar, but the depths remain calm. Learning to rest in those depths is the practice of stillness in the midst of chaos. One way to cultivate this is through attention to the body. Chaos pulls the mind outward, scattering it across countless distractions. But the body anchors you here, feeling your feet on the ground, your hands at rest, your breath moving in and out. These are doorways back into presence. The body cannot exist in the past or future. It lives only now. By returning to it, you discover a silence that resists nothing, even while the world swirls. The mind will protest, insisting that peace requires quiet surroundings. But look closely. Even in silence, the mind can be noisy with thought. And even in noise, stillness can be found when the mind releases its grip. Peace is not about what surrounds you, but about how you meet it. When awareness rests openly with what is, without clinging or resisting, stillness emerges. Meditation deepens this discovery. When you sit, distractions arise, thoughts, sounds, sensations. At first, they feel like intrusions. But as you observe without fighting, you realize that awareness itself is never disturbed. Thoughts pass, sounds fade, sensations shift, but the field of awareness remains unchanged. You begin to see that stillness is not something you must create. It is something you uncover by releasing resistance. Daily life provides countless opportunities to practice. In a noisy workplace, notice the silence beneath your thoughts. In a heated conversation, notice the stillness in your breath. In moments of overwhelm, close your eyes briefly and rest in the awareness that holds everything. You do not need to withdraw from life to taste peace. You only need to stop resisting the movement of life around you. This practice also reveals that chaos itself is not the problem. The problem is the demand that life be other than its island. When you stop fighting the noise, the rush, the unpredictability, they lose their power to disturb you. Stillness does not require removing chaos. It requires dropping the resistance to chaos. The storm continues, but you are no longer swept away. There is profound strength in this. Stillness is not fragile, it is resilient. It does not collapse when tested. In fact, it often shines brightest in difficulty. To be calm when everything is calm is simple. To be still while surrounded by storms is true mastery. This steadiness does not come from denial, but from resting in the unshakable ground of awareness. This inner silence also transforms relationships. When you meet others from stillness, you listen more deeply. You do not react instantly to provocation. You respond from clarity. Your presence becomes calming for those around you. People feel safer, less judged, more understood, because you are not adding your own turbulence to the moment. Stillness within becomes peace shared without. Stillness also teaches humility. You realize that the world does not need you to control it. Life moves on its own rhythm. By resting in silence, you step out of the illusion of control and into alignment with reality. This humility frees you from endless struggle. You no longer waste energy trying to silence the world. You allow it to be, while staying rooted in the silence that does not change. Another gift of this practice is clarity. Chaos often clouds judgment, pulling you into reactive decisions. But when you return to stillness, the mind clears. Solutions arise more naturally, not forced but revealed. The silence within becomes a source of wisdom, showing paths that the noisy mind could not see. Action becomes more precise, less frantic, guided by the calm ground of awareness. Over time, the practice of resting in inner silence changes how you experience life altogether. You stop waiting for external conditions to bring peace. You stop blaming noise, movement, or unpredictability for your unrest. You see that stillness is always here, available in every moment, beneath every experience. Chaos no longer feels like an enemy, but like a surface pattern, unable to disturb the depth of awareness beneath. This discovery is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, like the realization that you were never separate from peace to begin with. The silence was always present, patiently waiting for you to notice. Once you touch it, even briefly, you know it is real. And the more you return to it, the stronger it becomes, until chaos loses its power to unsettle you. In this way, stillness in the midst of chaos becomes one of the most profound freedoms. You are no longer dependent on a quiet environment, a perfect schedule, or a controlled life. You carry peace with you, wherever you go, because it is not found outside, but uncovered within. And in that freedom, resistance fades, replaced by a calm presence that no storm can shake. When the discovery of stillness reveals that even in the loudest and most unsettled moments, there is a ground of peace within you, the heart begins to sense another layer of wisdom. You see that chaos need not consume you if you do not resist it, yet when pain arises, the instinct is still to harden, to brace, to shield yourself against it. The body tenses, the mind contracts, and the heart closes. But this hardness does not protect you, it only deepens the suffering. The path asks for something far more courageous, not to armor yourself, but to soften. This softness is not weakness, but the noble strength that opens the door to true liberation. Softness begins with the willingness to feel. Most of the time, pain is amplified not by its raw sensation, but by the layers of resistance we add. We tell ourselves it should not be happening, that we cannot endure it, that it must end immediately. This resistance tightens every fiber of our being, creating a wall around the pain. Yet when you soften into it, when you let the body relax even as discomfort is present, something shifts. The pain remains, but the suffering lightens. Softness reveals that it is possible to be free in the very midst of difficulty. This practice shows itself clearly in physical pain. A headache, an ache in the back, the weariness of illness. The usual response is to fight, to clench, to grow frustrated. But the more you resist, the stronger the tension grows. Softening does not make the pain disappear instantly, but it changes your relationship with it. You breathe into the sensation, allowing it to exist without making it an enemy. Often, in that soft acceptance, the edges loosen, the heaviness lightens. Even if the pain remains, it no longer dominates you in the same way. The same truth applies to emotional pain. When grief arrives, the instinct is to resist, to distract, to bury it under activity. But grief ignored only hardens into bitterness. To soften into it is to let the tears fall, to let the ache be felt fully. It is to stop telling the story that you should be stronger or that you must hurry through it. In softness, grief becomes not a weight to crush you, but a passage that shapes you into someone deeper, someone more compassionate. Pain transforms when you stop resisting and allow yourself to rest inside it without judgment. Softness is also the ground of compassion. Hardness isolates, drawing boundaries between you and others, between you and your own heart. Softness dissolves those boundaries. When you soften into your own suffering, you naturally begin to understand the suffering of others. Their pain no longer feels foreign. It resonates with the same tenderness you have allowed in yourself. Compassion flows not from denying pain, but from letting it open you. The more you soften, the more expansive your compassion becomes, reaching beyond yourself into the shared human experience. There is a great strength hidden in this approach. Society often equates strength with stoicism, with the ability to remain unmoved, unshaken. But true resilience is not found in becoming stone. Stone cracks under pressure. Water, soft and yielding, endures and shapes the hardest rock. In the same way, the heart that softens is the heart that survives. It does not resist the blows of life. It absorbs them, flows with them, transforms them. Softness, paradoxically, is the most unbreakable form of strength. In practice, this means meeting every difficulty with a conscious choice to release tension. When anger rises, notice the tightness in your chest, the heat in your body. Instead of tightening further, breathe and soften those edges. When fear appears, notice the grip in your stomach, the clenching in your jaw. Instead of bracing, soften and allow the feeling to pass through. This does not erase emotion but transforms how you hold it. The emotion flows, teaches, and eventually releases, without leaving scars of resistance. Softness also reshapes how you relate to others in conflict. When attacked, the reflex is to harden, to defend, to strike back. Yet hard against hard only creates more fracture. To soften does not mean to submit or to accept harm, but to respond without the rigid armor of hostility. It means listening even when misunderstood, speaking with clarity without aggression, standing firm without cruelty. This kind of softness disarms conflict because it refuses to add more hardness to the fire. Meditation becomes the laboratory where this noble truth is tested and refined. Sitting still, discomfort arises, restlessness, tension, distraction. The mind wants to harden, to force concentration, to push away what feels unpleasant. But the deeper practice is to soften, to let the discomfort exist within awareness, without resistance. Over time, this builds a capacity to meet even intense experiences with gentleness. The mind becomes less combative, the heart less brittle, and awareness steadier. This way of living does not mean you invite suffering or wish for pain. It means that when life inevitably brings difficulty, you meet it with openness instead of contraction. You discover that freedom is not the absence of pain, but the absence of resistance. In softness, you allow reality to be what it is, and in that allowance, you find liberation. Softness also teaches surrender to impermanence. Hardness clings, trying to hold on, refusing to let go. Softness opens the hand, allowing things to pass as they must. In this surrender, grief is gentler, joy is richer, and life flows more naturally. You stop fighting what cannot be controlled, and instead, you learn to move with the rhythm of change. There is also a subtle joy that arises in softness. When you stop bracing against life, you discover a lightness in being. Even in difficulty, there is space, there is breath, there is presence. This joy is not the opposite of pain, but the peace that coexists with it. It is the quiet smile of one who knows that even the heaviest burden can be carried when the heart does not harden. Over time, practicing softness changes everything. Pain no longer feels like punishment, but as part of the texture of being alive. Difficult people become opportunities to practice patience. Setbacks become reminders to release control. The world no longer needs to be fought at every turn because you have discovered another way, to meet it with gentleness, and so softness reveals itself as noble, not because it avoids difficulty, but because it transforms it. It is the strength that refuses to harden, the courage that refuses to close, the wisdom that refuses to resist. In choosing softness again and again, you find the path to liberation, not far away, not hidden, but here, in every moment, you stop fighting and allow the heart to remain open. When softness begins to guide the way you meet pain, a new clarity emerges. You see that hardening only deepens suffering, while yielding allows life to move through you without breaking you. Yet beneath the surface of each experience, there is another layer often misunderstood, a current that carries every action, thought, and intention forward. Many hear the word karma and shrink back, treating it as punishment or cosmic judgment. But karma is not a prison sentence. It is momentum. It is the natural flow of energy unfolding through cause and effect, something to meet with awareness rather than fear. To understand karma as momentum is to recognize that every action ripples outward, shaping what comes next. A kind word spoken plants a seed of trust. A harsh word spoken plants a seed of tension. Neither is permanent, yet both carry momentum. Karma is not a divine punishment keeping score, but the natural echo of what has been set in motion. When this is seen, life stops feeling like a system of rewards and penalties and begins to reveal itself as a living field of energy you participate in every moment. This shift in perspective changes how you respond to difficulty. When hardship comes, the reflex may be to think, "This is my punishment." That story tightens the heart and breeds shame. But when you view it as momentum, the weight softens. Hardship is simply energy returning, the unfolding of countless causes. It is not personal blame, but an opportunity to meet what has arisen with clarity. The question shifts from "why me?" to "how do I meet this wisely?" This shift turns resistance into awareness. Momentum also reveals itself in habits. Every repeated action strengthens its own pathway. A thought rehearsed often becomes a reflex. An action repeated often becomes character. Karma is not only about past lives or distant consequences. It is the momentum of your daily choices shaping your future experience. Each time you act with anger, you strengthen the current of anger. Each time you act with patience, you strengthen the current of patience. This is not punishment, but the law of momentum. Seeing this clearly gives you back responsibility without the weight of guilt. Meeting karma with awareness means stepping into the present moment as the place where momentum can shift. You may not control the seeds already planted, but you can choose how to meet them. If anger ripens, you can fuel it with more anger, or you can soften and respond with patience. If fear arises, you can resist it and give it more power, or you can breathe with it and allow it to pass. Awareness becomes the steering point in the stream of karma, guiding where the energy flows next. This view also dissolves fatalism. Many think karma means being trapped in destiny, unable to escape what has been written. But momentum is not fixed. It can be redirected with attention. A river may carry strong currents, but with guidance, its course can change. So too with karma. Old patterns may be powerful, but awareness can shift them. Freedom lies not in erasing the past, but in shaping the direction of the present. Relationships offer clear examples of this. Harsh words spoken in anger carry momentum, often leading to conflict. But if met with awareness, that momentum can be interrupted. Instead of reacting with equal harshness, you choose silence, or patience, or kindness. The energy shifts, and a different path opens. In this way, karma is not punishment, but invitation. An invitation to break cycles and create new ones. Even joy is seen differently through this lens. Joy is not a random gift, but the ripening of seeds planted through gratitude, kindness, and openness. When you experience joy, you can recognize it as the fruit of past currents and meet it with appreciation rather than clinging. By doing so, you allow its momentum to continue flowing, enriching not only yourself, but those around you. Meditation provides a laboratory for this understanding. Old thoughts surface, sometimes painful, sometimes distracting. They are the momentum of past conditioning. At first, it feels overwhelming. But when you sit with them, neither resisting nor indulging, you see how the energy shifts. A thought arises, is noticed, and dissolves. Another arises, and the same process continues. You begin to see karma not as punishment, but as energy flowing through awareness, transformed by the quality of your presence. This perspective also deepens compassion. When others act with cruelty or ignorance, it is easy to judge them as inherently bad. But if you see their actions as momentum, the product of past conditioning, pain, or misunderstanding, judgment softens. You do not excuse harm, but you understand its roots. This allows you to respond not with hatred, but with wisdom and care. Compassion grows when you recognize that everyone is carried by currents, some stronger, some darker, but none beyond transformation. Karma, as momentum, also frees you from the fear of making mistakes. Fear often arises from the belief that one wrong step condemns you forever. But momentum is fluid. A misstep can be followed by awareness, and awareness can redirect the path. The current may carry you for a time, but you are never powerless to shift its direction. This view replaces paralyzing fear with responsibility and hope. There is also freedom in recognizing that not all consequences are immediate. Seeds may take time to ripen, and their fruits may appear when least expected. This teaches patience. You may not see the results of kindness right away, but the current is moving. You may not escape the weight of harmful actions instantly, but their power lessens as new choices are made. Trust in the unseen unfolding is part of meeting karma with awareness. In daily life, this understanding transforms how you live. Every small action is seen as part of the current, the tone of your voice, the way you treat strangers, the attention you give to your thoughts. Nothing is wasted. Each moment is an opportunity to shift momentum toward clarity, kindness, and freedom. Life becomes less about fearing judgment and more about cultivating energy that supports peace for yourself and others. Over time, this way of seeing dissolves resistance to life itself. You no longer feel hunted by punishment or trapped by fate. You see energy moving, causes unfolding, patterns ripening. And in that seeing, you find freedom, the freedom to participate with awareness, to shift direction, to release the grip of fear. Karma ceases to be a word of dread and becomes a reminder of interconnection, responsibility, and possibility. In this way, karma as momentum is not a burden but a gift. It shows you that life is not random, nor is it a cosmic ledger of punishment. It is a flow of energy shaped by countless causes, continually offering you the chance to meet it wisely, and when you meet it with awareness instead of fear, resistance falls away. What remains is a deeper trust in the unfolding and a steady confidence that every moment is a doorway into transformation. When karma is seen as momentum rather than punishment, the heart loosens. You begin to recognize that what unfolds is not a verdict hanging over you, but energy moving through time, shaped by choices and conditions. This insight reduces fear and deepens responsibility, but it also points towards something quieter. If every action carries momentum, then how you meet each moment matters greatly. And there is a way of meeting life that is often overlooked. Silence. Not the silence of suppression or avoidance, but the silence that listens without rushing to respond, explain, or control. This silence becomes a doorway to a deeper way of knowing. Silence in this sense is not emptiness of meaning, but fullness of presence. Words can sometimes crowd out understanding, while silence creates space for it. When you stop preparing replies in your head, when you stop filling gaps with noise, you begin to hear differently. You notice subtleties in tone, in gesture, in pauses. You feel the weight behind what is said, and even behind what is unsaid. This is knowledge that does not come from analysis, but from receptivity. In daily life, silence can be transformative. When someone speaks in anger, the reflex is often to defend yourself immediately, to meet fire with fire. But silence interrupts the chain. By holding space without rushing to retaliate, you allow the heat to cool. Often, the person themselves hears the weight of their words more clearly in the quiet. Silence, in this way, is not passive. It actively reshapes the moment by creating room for awareness. Silence also allows truth to arise within yourself. The mind is quick to narrate, to explain, to justify. But beneath the chatter, there is a deeper knowing that cannot be forced. When you sit in silence, not needing to solve or control, insights often surface on their own. This is why many profound realizations come in quiet moments, walking alone, sitting under a tree, lying awake in the night. Silence clears the clutter so that wisdom can reveal itself. Non-resistance is born in this practice. So much of suffering comes from the need to control the narrative, to have the right answer, to win the argument. Silence shows that you do not always need to hold the reins. You can let the moment be what it is without forcing it into your design. This softens the grip of ego, reduces conflict, and allows life to unfold naturally. By choosing silence, you stop adding resistance, and in that openness, peace emerges. Meditation is the most direct form of this teaching. Sitting in silence, you encounter the constant chatter of the mind. At first, it feels overwhelming. But as you allow it without chasing or suppressing, the chatter gradually quiets. In the stillness, awareness becomes clearer, broader, less entangled. You realize that silence is not the absence of thought, but the space in which thought arises and dissolves. That space is steady, unshaken, always present. This way of knowing also deepens relationships. Many people do not truly listen, they wait for their turn to speak. But when you listen in silence, without preparing your response, others feel it. They feel heard in a way that words alone cannot provide. Trust deepens, walls soften, and genuine connection becomes possible. Sometimes the most healing gift you can offer is not advice but silent presence. Silence is also a powerful teacher in conflict with yourself. When you struggle internally, the mind often creates endless commentary. I should be stronger. I shouldn't feel this way. I must fix this. These judgments add layers of resistance. But when you meet yourself in silence, you drop the need to explain or solve. You simply sit with what is present, fear, sadness, confusion, and in that stillness, the storm loses its power. You realize that you do not need to fight every thought. You can let them rise and fall in the silence that holds them. There is wisdom, too, in the silence of nature. Standing among trees, by rivers, under the sky, you feel a presence that does not argue or explain. The silence of nature is not empty but alive, filled with rhythms and currents beyond words. By resting in it, you begin to sense that true knowing is not always verbal. It is felt in the body, in the heart, in the quiet recognition of being part of something vast. This practice also counters the noise of modern life. Constant messages, notifications, and conversations fill the mind with stimulation. Without silence, you lose the capacity to discern what truly matters. By carving out even small spaces of quiet, a pause before speaking, a moment of stillness before reacting, a walk without distraction, you reclaim the depth that noise drowns out. In silence, priorities clarify and the unnecessary falls away. Non-resistance through silence does not mean you never speak or act. It means that when you do, it arises from clarity rather than compulsion. Words spoken from silence carry weight because they are not cluttered by ego or defensiveness. Actions taken from silence are precise because they are not reactions but responses. Silence purifies expression by grounding it in awareness rather than noise. Over time, silence becomes a companion rather than an absence. You begin to seek it not because you dislike sound, but because you recognize its richness. You no longer fear pauses in conversation, quiet evenings, or moments without distraction. Instead, you treasure them as opportunities to reconnect with a knowing that runs deeper than words. Through this, resistance to life itself begins to fall away. Silence shows that you do not need to control every moment with commentary or judgment. You can allow life to speak in its own way. Sometimes through words, sometimes through action, sometimes through stillness. To listen deeply without interference is to align with reality rather than struggle against it. And so, silence reveals itself as a way of knowing more profound than analysis. It is the soil in which awareness grows, the space in which wisdom emerges, the field where non-resistance takes root. By listening without the need to answer, explain, or control, you discover that silence is not emptiness, but presence. A presence that teaches you how to meet life with openness, gentleness, and peace. When silence is welcomed, not as emptiness, but as a deeper form of knowing, you begin to notice that much of the noise in life arises from the self defending itself. The urge to answer quickly, to justify, to explain, all come from the need to protect an identity that feels fragile. Silence reveals how unnecessary much of this island. From that doorway, the path leads into one of the most profound insights of Buddhist wisdom, the recognition of no self. This truth does not erase your humanity, but it dissolves the illusion of a permanent self that must always be defended, protected, and reinforced. In that dissolution lies a freedom beyond measure. The concept of no self, or anatta, is often misunderstood. Many think it means denying existence or pretending you are nothing, but it is not nihilism. It is the recognition that what you call self is not a fixed entity, but a shifting process. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, they arise and pass like clouds. You call them me, but they are never the same from one moment to the next. No, self is not the denial of experience, but the release of the illusion that there is a solid, unchanging I at the center of it all. When you cling to the idea of a permanent self, resistance naturally follows. Any threat to identity feels like an attack. Criticism hurts not because of the words themselves, but because they seem to shake the self you are trying to protect. Change feels terrifying because it threatens the stability of the identity you cling to. Even praise can become a trap because you fear losing it and so tighten around the image it creates. But when you see that the self is not solid, the need for defense drops away. There is nothing fixed to protect, and so much of the tension dissolves. This realization reshapes your relationship with fear. Fear thrives on the idea of a self that can be destroyed. Death terrifies because it appears to erase this permanent identity. But if the self is already a process, already a flow, then death is not the end of something fixed, but the continuation of change. The fear softens because you see that what you are is not limited to the image you cling to. You are not a single identity to lose. You are the unfolding of life itself. The same shift transforms anger. Anger often arises when the self feels disrespected, ignored, or diminished. But if there is no permanent self to defend, what is there to attack? Insults lose much of their power because they no longer pierce a fixed identity. They are just sounds, just opinions, just passing waves. This does not mean you become passive in the face of harm, but it means you respond without the extra burden of ego. You act from clarity, not from the blind need to protect an illusion. In relationships, the insight of no self brings profound freedom. Much of the conflict between people arises from clinging to rigid identities: parent, partner, leader, follower. These roles become cages, limiting how you see yourself and how you see others. When you release the need to fix identity, you meet others as fluid beings rather than static roles. Love becomes freer because it is not about protecting an image of who someone should be. Compassion deepens because you see that others, too, are processes unfolding, not fixed selves to be judged. Meditation reveals this truth directly. As you observe the mind, you notice that thoughts arise without your control, emotions appear and fade, sensations shift constantly. Where is the permanent self in this? Each time you look for it, you find only change. The self dissolves under observation, revealing not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, but emptiness in the sense of no fixed core. This emptiness is liberating because it shows that you are not trapped in any one version of yourself. No self also reshapes ambition. Many goals are driven by the desire to build or protect identity, to be seen as successful, intelligent, strong. But when you see through the illusion of self, ambition loosens. You may still act, still create, still pursue, but the weight of identity is gone. You do not need achievements to define you, because there is no permanent you to hold them. Work becomes play, creation becomes expression, action becomes service, all without the burden of ego. This insight also softens suffering. Much of suffering comes from clinging to a self-image that does not match reality. You want to see yourself as capable, but life shows you your limits. You want to see yourself as loved, but relationships shift. You want to see yourself as permanent, but aging and death arrive. Each clash between self-image and reality creates pain. When you release the image, the clash dissolves. You suffer less because you are no longer resisting what island. Even morality is transformed by this teaching. Without the illusion of a permanent self, the boundary between you and others blurs. The pain you cause another is not separate from you, because there is no fixed me and them. Compassion becomes natural because you see the interconnection clearly. Harm to others is harm to the whole, and kindness flows more easily when the walls of self dissolve. At first, the thought of no self can feel unsettling. The ego resists, insisting that without a fixed self, there is nothing to hold on to. But with practice, the fear gives way to relief. The self you have been defending all this time was never stable, never secure. To let it go is to drop a burden you did not need to carry. What remains is not emptiness in a bleak sense, but freedom. Freedom to flow, to change, to live without the constant strain of self-protection. This freedom touches even the smallest details of daily life. When waiting in line, you do not need to feed the self with impatience. When praised, you do not need to inflate. When criticized, you do not need to collapse. You move more lightly through the world because the self no longer clings to every ripple of experience. You are free not because conditions are perfect, but because you are no longer chained to the illusion of permanence. Over time, the insight of no self becomes less of a concept and more of a lived reality. You stop saying, "This is who I am," and start saying, "This is what is arising now." Identity becomes fluid, flexible, open. You stop fighting change because you see that you are change. You stop fearing loss because there was never a fixed self to lose, and in that release, resistance dissolves completely. This is the freedom of no self, not an abstract philosophy but a direct liberation from the endless struggle of defending identity. It is the quiet strength of living without chains, the deep peace of knowing there is nothing permanent to protect. In this freedom, life flows through you, as you, without resistance, without fear, without the burden of self. When the illusion of a permanent self begins to dissolve, the grip of fear starts to loosen. You realize there is nothing solid to defend, no rigid identity to protect at all costs. This opens a vast space, but in that space, something unsettling remains: uncertainty. The mind longs for guarantees, for the comfort of knowing what comes next, for fixed answers that never change. Yet life refuses to offer such assurances. Every moment unfolds in ways you cannot fully predict. Instead of resisting this truth, the path now calls you to meet uncertainty, not with dread, but with joy, to recognize unpredictability as the very pulse of life itself. Uncertainty is often treated as danger. From childhood, we are taught to plan, to secure, to control. But control is always partial, and plans are always fragile. The unknown is not an error in life's design, it is life's essence. Without uncertainty, there would be no surprise, no discovery, no growth. Every adventure, every breakthrough, every moment of wonder arises because the future is not fixed. Fear transforms into gratitude when you see that uncertainty is the soil where possibility grows. When you look closely, much of anxiety is not about what is happening now, but about what might happen later. The mind spins stories of what could go wrong, what may be lost, what might never arrive. These stories are fueled by resistance to not knowing. Yet when you stop demanding certainty, anxiety softens. You learn to rest in the openness of not knowing, to allow the future to reveal itself one moment at a time. This is not recklessness, but trust. Trust that life has always carried you, even when you could not see the path ahead. Uncertainty is also the birthplace of creativity. If everything were predictable, nothing new could emerge. Artists, writers, inventors all step into the unknown, creating from a space where outcomes are not guaranteed. Their work is possible only because life is unpredictable. By learning to rejoice in uncertainty, you reclaim this same creative freedom in your own life. Every choice becomes an act of exploration rather than a desperate attempt to control results. In relationships, uncertainty is equally vital. No one can guarantee that love will last unchanged, that friendship will never falter, that connection will always remain steady. And yet, it is precisely this uncertainty that makes love so alive. Each day together is a gift, not a guarantee. To rejoice in this is to stop demanding permanence and start cherishing presence. Love becomes lighter, more generous, when it is not shackled to the illusion of certainty. Meditation is a training ground for this practice. Sitting in silence, you never know what will arise: calm or restlessness, joy or sorrow, clarity or confusion. The temptation is to resist what feels unwanted and cling to what feels pleasant. But when you open to whatever comes, you discover the beauty of uncertainty. Each breath, each thought, each sensation becomes part of an unfolding you cannot script. Awareness itself rejoices because it is freed from the exhausting work of control. The wisdom of uncertainty also reshapes ambition. Many chase security in careers, wealth, or reputation, believing that certainty will finally bring peace. But peace does not come from locking down the future. It comes from meeting the future as it arrives, with openness. When you accept uncertainty, you still act, you still strive, but without desperation. Success and failure both become part of the adventure, not verdicts of worth. This lightens ambition and frees you to pursue work with sincerity rather than fear. Uncertainty even deepens resilience. When you stop demanding guarantees, you become more flexible. Change no longer feels like betrayal, but as life doing what it has always done, shifting, evolving, surprising. Resilience grows because you are not shattered each time the unexpected arrives. Instead, you adapt, you learn, you grow. Uncertainty, once feared, becomes the very training ground of strength. The joy of uncertainty is also revealed in small moments. A walk without a destination, a conversation that unfolds without a script, a day left unscheduled, each opens space for surprise. These experiences remind you that unpredictability is not always danger, it is often delight. To rejoice in uncertainty is to see that some of life's most precious moments are the ones you never planned. This perspective changes how you face endings. The mind fears them because they throw you into the unknown. But every ending is also a beginning, though the shape of it is hidden. By rejoicing in uncertainty, you learn to step into endings with trust, knowing that new possibilities are already forming. Grief may still come, but beneath it is the quiet faith that life continues to unfold in ways beyond what you can imagine. Over time, rejoicing in uncertainty transforms how you experience life itself. Each day becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about meeting whatever arises with openness. You begin to see the unknown not as a void to fear, but as a canvas alive with possibility. This shift does not remove challenges, but changes how you hold them. Instead of bracing against them, you meet them with curiosity. And so, uncertainty becomes not an enemy, but a companion. It walks beside you in every step, reminding you that nothing is fixed, that everything remains alive with potential. By rejoicing in it, you discover freedom, the freedom to live without the chains of fear, to embrace each moment as fresh, unrepeatable, and full of possibility. This is the gift of uncertainty. It keeps you awake, it keeps you alive, and it keeps you open to the endless unfolding of life. When uncertainty is no longer feared, but embraced as the pulse of possibility, life begins to feel lighter. You stop demanding control, and in that release, you open yourself to what each moment brings. Yet in that openness, you inevitably encounter suffering, yours and the suffering of others. The reflex is often to resist it, to label it as an error in existence, something to be fixed or hidden away. But resistance only deepens the wound. The path forward invites a different way, to view suffering not as a private curse, but as a shared human truth, a thread that connects you to every being who has ever lived. In this recognition, compassion awakens. Suffering is often what isolates us. When pain comes, the mind says, "Why me? No one understands." This story creates walls, cutting you off from others. But when you see suffering as universal, the walls dissolve. Birth, loss, sickness, aging, disappointment, no one escapes these truths. They are not signs of failure, but the very conditions of life. By acknowledging this, you step out of isolation and into connection. Suffering becomes less of a prison and more of a bridge. This compassionate view begins with your own pain. Instead of judging yourself for feeling weak, you soften into the understanding that suffering is part of being human. The tears you shed are not signs of inadequacy, but proof of your capacity to feel deeply. When you stop resisting your own suffering, you stop adding shame on top of pain. You begin to treat yourself with gentleness, the same way you would comfort a friend. This self-compassion lays the foundation for extending compassion outward. From here, empathy naturally expands. When you see others struggling, you recognize the same patterns you have known. Their anger may hide fear, their defensiveness may mask grief, their cruelty may spring from their own wounds. Instead of meeting suffering with judgment, you meet it with understanding. You do not excuse harm, but you see the human beneath it. This shift transforms relationships. Conflicts soften, forgiveness becomes possible, and love deepens because it is rooted in shared vulnerability rather than idealized perfection. Meditation on compassion, such as loving kindness practice, makes this truth visceral. You begin by sending well wishes to yourself, then to loved ones, then to those who challenge you, and eventually to all beings. As you sit with this practice, you feel the shared weight of suffering, but also the shared longing for peace. Everyone, no matter how different, wants to be free from pain. This realization erodes barriers of race, class, religion, and even enmity. The more you feel it, the more compassion becomes your natural response to life. The compassionate view of suffering also reshapes how you respond to global pain. News of war, injustice, and disaster can feel overwhelming. The instinct may be to shut down, to turn away, to protect yourself from despair. But when you see suffering as shared, you realize your response matters. Even if you cannot fix everything, you can act with compassion in the space you inhabit. A kind word, a helping hand, a refusal to add more cruelty. These are not small gestures. They ripple outward, contributing to the healing of the whole. Another profound aspect of this practice is that compassion transforms suffering itself. Pain remains, but when you meet it with love, it loses some of its sting. Grief may still ache, but it becomes softer when you see it as part of the human condition, a sign of love that once was. Fear may still rise, but it is less isolating when you know others are walking the same path. Compassion does not erase suffering, but it changes its meaning. It becomes a doorway to connection rather than a wall of separation. This perspective also strengthens resilience. When you resist suffering, you exhaust yourself fighting reality. But when you accept it as part of life, you save energy for what truly matters, how you respond. Compassion makes you stronger, not weaker, because it keeps the heart open in the face of difficulty. Instead of collapsing into despair, you remain connected to others. Instead of hardening into bitterness, you remain capable of love. This strength is not loud, but it endures. In everyday life, opportunities to practice abound. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you can see it not just as rudeness but as a sign they may be rushing in stress or pain. When a coworker lashes out, you can remember that suffering often spills over. When a friend withdraws, you can offer patience rather than judgment. Each small moment of compassion interrupts the cycle of suffering and creates space for healing. There is also a deep spiritual dimension here. Suffering, viewed through compassion, becomes a teacher of interconnection. It shows you that no one stands apart. The loneliness you feel has been felt by countless others. The grief you carry has been carried across generations. To see this is to recognize that you are part of something larger. The human heart is vast enough to hold all of it, not as a burden but as a testament to our shared humanity. Over time, this compassionate view dissolves much of the fear around suffering. You no longer need to hide from it, deny it, or pretend it does not exist. You meet it openly, knowing it is the common ground beneath us all. And in that meeting, love grows, not sentimental love, but the fierce, steady love that arises when you see yourself in others and others in yourself. In this way, suffering stops being the enemy and becomes the very force that deepens connection. What once isolated you now binds you to the human story. What once felt like punishment now becomes a call to compassion. And in answering that call, you discover a strength, a gentleness, and a love that could never have arisen without the truth of suffering itself. When suffering is no longer seen as a solitary weight, but as a shared truth that binds you to others, the heart begins to soften in new ways. Compassion makes it clear that resistance isolates, while acceptance opens. From this understanding arises another step on the path: surrender. Not surrender as defeat, but surrender as harmony, the choice to move with life instead of against it. And perhaps the simplest, most direct way to practice this surrender is found in walking. Each step becomes a mirror, showing you how to meet existence without pushing or pulling, how to let the ground carry you while you rest in presence. Walking is often treated as nothing more than a means of getting from one place to another. The mind leaps ahead to the destination, already planning what comes next. But mindful walking turns the journey itself into practice. Each step is complete in itself, an opportunity to surrender the need to arrive and simply be with the act of moving. The body lifts, shifts, and lands an effortless rhythm that mirrors the flow of life when you stop interfering. Surrender in walking begins with the body's wisdom. You do not need to command every muscle to move. The body already knows. Each step is carried by balance, gravity, and rhythm. To walk mindfully is to trust this wisdom, to let go of the illusion of control and simply allow movement to unfold. This trust becomes a metaphor for life itself. Just as the body knows how to walk, life knows how to flow when you stop tightening around it. When you walk with surrender, the need to rush dissolves. Normally, walking is hurried, driven by the future. But when you slow down, each step reveals its richness. The texture of the ground beneath you, the air brushing your skin, the steady beat of your pace all remind you that life is happening now, not at the end of the path. Walking becomes a meditation on presence, a way of practicing surrender, one step at a time. This practice also reshapes your relationship with control. Walking shows that you cannot skip ahead without passing through the steps in between. Life unfolds the same way. No moment can be bypassed. Each step must be lived. Surrender means accepting this truth instead of resisting it, allowing yourself to inhabit the moment you are in fully, without demanding it be different. The ground under your feet becomes both teacher and guide, showing you that the only place of freedom is here. Walking as surrender also quiets the restless mind. As you place one foot down and then the other, awareness settles into the body. The swirl of thoughts begins to soften because attention is anchored in rhythm. You are no longer pulled into constant planning or regret. You are carried by the simple act of moving. The mind learns to let go of its need to control the story and instead rest in the silence of each step. In relationships, this practice finds expression as well. To walk alongside another person is to embody surrender. You match pace, listen with your presence, share silence without needing to fill it. Walking together becomes an act of connection free from pushing or pulling. You are not trying to lead or to lag behind. You are simply present, moving together in harmony. This simple act can deepen intimacy more than many words ever could. Surrender through walking also teaches patience. Each step is small, and yet together they carry you across great distances. You learn that transformation is not about dramatic leaps, but about steady, faithful movement. In the same way, spiritual growth unfolds step by step, moment by moment. There is no need to rush. Every step taken with surrender is already part of arrival. Walking mindfully reveals impermanence in a tangible way. Each step arises and passes, never repeated. The foot that lifts is not the same foot that lands. This mirrors the truth of life itself. Every moment passes into the next, every breath into another. To surrender in walking is to accept impermanence, not as loss, but as rhythm. You begin to see change not as disruption, but as the natural unfolding of existence. Meditation on walking can be practiced anywhere, in a garden, in a hallway, on a city street. The setting does not matter. What matters is the quality of attention. By surrendering to each step, you cultivate the ability to surrender in every aspect of life. The walk becomes a rehearsal for meeting joy, sorrow, uncertainty, and change without resistance. Each step is a reminder. This is enough. This is the way. This is life. Over time, walking as surrender transforms how you approach challenges. Instead of leaping ahead in worry or collapsing in despair, you take the next step. When faced with uncertainty, you surrender to the step at hand. When overwhelmed, you return to the ground beneath you. Problems may remain, but the panic around them lessens because you are no longer trying to live the whole journey at once. You trust that step by step, life carries you forward. This practice is also a doorway to gratitude. When you walk with surrender, you notice details often missed: the warmth of sunlight, the sound of leaves, the beating of your own heart. These ordinary moments become extraordinary when you surrender the rush of mind and allow them to touch you. Gratitude grows because you no longer take each step for granted. Every movement becomes a gift, a reminder that life supports you in countless unseen ways. Walking also carries symbolic meaning in spiritual traditions. Pilgrimages are nothing more than walking with surrender step after step, trusting that the journey itself transforms. This truth does not belong only to monasteries or sacred paths. It is available in every walk you take. To walk with surrender is to turn your daily movement into a pilgrimage, an offering of presence to the ground that carries you. In the deepest sense, walking teaches that surrender is not about stopping action, but about moving without struggle. The steps continue, but the pushing and pulling cease. You no longer demand that life be other than its island. You meet each moment with the same trust you place in the ground to hold your weight. This is surrender, not collapse, not passivity, but alignment with the rhythm of life. As this practice deepens, even the act of arriving shifts. Destination is no longer the point. Arrival is found in every step, because each step is complete in itself. Life ceases to be a race from one goal to the next and becomes a continuous unfolding of presence. You surrender to the walk itself, and in that surrender, you discover freedom. Walking as surrender, then, is more than a metaphor. It is a lived experience of how to meet existence without resistance. With each step, you learn to release the urge to push ahead or pull back. You discover that peace is not waiting at the end of the path, but available in every footfall, every breath, every moment. You allow yourself to move with life instead of against it. When walking is embraced as surrender, every step teaches you that resistance is unnecessary, that life carries you if you allow it. But there is still a deeper refinement of this surrender, the willingness not only to accept what is pleasant and neutral, but also to bow to what wounds. Pain, loss, failure, and disappointment do not feel like gifts when they arrive. They feel sharp, unfair, heavy. Yet when you meet them with gratitude, their nature changes. Gratitude does not erase the hurt, but it transforms the way it shapes you, revealing difficulty as the very force that polishes the soul. Gratitude for what hurts begins with a shift in perspective. The instinct is to curse hardship, to see it only as an obstacle. But when you ask what it is teaching, the bitterness softens. Every struggle carries within it a lesson you could not have learned otherwise. A broken plan teaches flexibility. A betrayal teaches discernment. A loss teaches depth of love. Gratitude does not mean you wished for the suffering, but it means you recognize the wisdom it left behind. When you thank what hurts, you step out of resistance. Resistance says, "This should not be happening." Gratitude says, "This too has meaning." That shift changes the entire texture of your experience. Instead of fighting against reality, you begin to walk with it. The pain may still burn, but gratitude cools the despair. It shows you that the wound is not meaningless, but part of a larger unfolding. This practice is not about pretending that pain is pleasant. It is about acknowledging that pain refines you. Just as fire tempers steel, hardship tempers character. Gratitude for what hurts recognizes that growth often comes not from comfort, but from challenge. The heart expands when it has been broken and healed. Compassion deepens when it has tasted sorrow. Patience strengthens when it has endured delay. Gratitude allows you to honor this refinement instead of resenting it. Everyday life provides countless examples. When you face rejection, it stings. But gratitude can reveal that rejection clears the way for alignment with what truly fits. When illness strikes, gratitude can uncover a deeper appreciation for health and for the fragility of life. When failure comes, gratitude can remind you that failure humbles, teaches resilience, and opens new paths. Each difficulty becomes not a closed door but a hidden guide when met with gratitude. Meditation on gratitude for pain deepens this practice. Sitting quietly, you bring to mind a hurt, perhaps recent, perhaps long past. The instinct may be to recoil, but you soften and whisper thanks. Thanks for what it revealed. Thanks for how it shaped you. Thanks for the lessons hidden within it. At first, this feels unnatural, but over time, the heart begins to open to the possibility that even suffering can be sacred when seen clearly. This view also reshapes relationships. People who hurt you may still be held accountable, but gratitude can arise for the ways their actions taught you boundaries, self-respect, or forgiveness. Gratitude does not excuse harm, but it reclaims power from bitterness. It allows you to take wisdom from the wound instead of letting the wound define you. This is not submission to injustice, but liberation from resentment. Gratitude for what hurts also transforms memory. Past pain often lingers as regret, replaying endlessly in the mind. But when you thank the past for its lessons, the memory softens. Instead of seeing only loss, you see growth. Instead of carrying shame, you carry understanding. Gratitude rewrites the story, not by erasing what happened, but by reframing its meaning. The past no longer chains you because you have drawn treasure from it. This practice strengthens resilience in the present. When new pain arises, you remember how old pain became a teacher. Gratitude becomes a bridge, reminding you that today's wound may be tomorrow's wisdom. This memory gives you strength to endure, knowing that hardship has always left behind gifts. Gratitude turns suffering from endless punishment into a process of transformation. The practice also nurtures humility. When you thank what hurts, you acknowledge that you do not always know what is best in the moment. What you once cursed may later reveal itself as necessary. Gratitude teaches you to trust life's wisdom beyond your limited perspective. It softens arrogance and replaces it with openness, reminding you that even what feels unbearable can contain unseen grace. Gratitude for pain also deepens compassion. When you honor your own wounds, you recognize the same fragility in others. You see that their struggles may also be shaping them in hidden ways. This awareness makes you gentler, less judgmental, more willing to support. Gratitude expands the heart not only for your own journey, but for the journeys of all beings who walk through suffering. This practice does not mean seeking out suffering. It means that when suffering arrives, as it inevitably will, you do not waste it. You let it teach, refine, and awaken you. Gratitude ensures that pain is not endured in vain, but transformed into wisdom. Life becomes less frightening because you know even its harshest blows can serve your growth. Over time, gratitude for what hurts becomes second nature. When setbacks arrive, you breathe and ask, "What gift is hidden here?" When loss occurs, You grieve, but also give thanks for the love that made the loss possible. When disappointment appears, you thank it for clearing illusions. Each hurt becomes part of the polishing of your soul, making you clearer, softer, stronger. In this way, gratitude transforms suffering into a source of light. What once felt like poison becomes medicine. What once felt like punishment becomes initiation. Gratitude for what hurts does not deny pain, but it redeems it, revealing its hidden purpose. And in that redemption, the heart grows into a vast, resilient, compassionate space, capable of holding all of life without resistance. When gratitude begins to extend even to the things that wound you, suffering loses much of its power to harden the heart. You discover that pain can polish you rather than break you. Yet in the midst of living, one of the sharpest kinds of pain comes not from events themselves, but from others, their words, their judgments, their misunderstandings. Conflict seems unavoidable, and the instinct is to fight back, to explain, to correct. But this instinct often fuels the fire rather than calming it. The path now points to another way: noble silence. Not the silence of withdrawal or suppression, but the silence that arises from wisdom, the silence that refuses to resist being misunderstood. Noble silence is powerful because it interrupts the endless chain of reaction. In conflict, words can become weapons, sharpened by pride and fear. The more you try to justify yourself, the more tangled the argument becomes. Silence cuts through this tangle. It does not mean agreement with what is false, but it means refusing to add more fuel. By choosing silence, you step out of the cycle of escalation and into the stillness where clarity can return. This silence is not weakness. It is restraint born of strength. Anyone can shout, argue, or demand the last word. But it takes discipline to remain still when provoked, to hold space for the storm to pass. In that stillness, you discover that not every battle requires your participation. Some conflicts resolve themselves when not fed. Some words lose their power when not echoed. Noble silence is the courage to trust that truth does not always need immediate defense. When you practice silence in conflict, you also learn to release the need to be fully understood. Much suffering comes from the insistence that others must see you exactly as you see yourself. But no one can carry your entire perspective. To demand total understanding is to set yourself up for endless frustration. Noble silence accepts this limitation. It says, "I know who I am. I do not need every person to confirm it." This release is not resignation but freedom. You stop resisting the inevitable gaps in human understanding. Silence also creates space for listening. When you are not busy defending yourself, you can hear more clearly what is being said, not just the words, but the pain, fear, or confusion beneath them. Often, conflict arises not because of malice, but because of unhealed wounds or unmet needs. Noble silence allows you to perceive these roots without the noise of your own defensiveness. Sometimes, what the other person needs most is not your argument but your presence. This practice transforms relationships. In moments of tension, silence disarms hostility. It prevents the spiral of attack and counterattack. It creates pauses where compassion can enter. Instead of meeting anger with anger, you meet it with space. This space is not passive. It is active patience, active awareness, active compassion. Over time, people begin to trust that you are not someone who escalates conflict, but someone who grounds it in peace. Noble silence also deepens humility. Conflict often stirs the ego, which insists on proving itself right. But silence acknowledges that truth does not need constant defense, that your worth is not dependent on winning every argument. This humility does not belittle you, it strengthens you. It frees you from the exhausting need to dominate conversations. It allows you to remain centered even when others misunderstand. Meditation helps prepare for this. In silence, you watch thoughts arise and fade without needing to react to each one. This trains the mind to do the same in conflict. When provoked, you notice the urge to lash out, but you do not follow it. You allow the impulse to dissolve in the same way thoughts dissolve in meditation. The silence of practice becomes the silence of daily life. Noble silence is not about avoiding responsibility. There are times when speaking is necessary to protect, to clarify, or to stand for justice. But even then, silence teaches you to speak from clarity rather than reactivity. Words that arise from silence carry more weight because they are not cluttered by anger or fear. They are precise, measured, and often fewer. Silence ensures that when you speak, you are serving truth, not ego. The power of this practice becomes clear when you face repeated misunderstanding. To be misjudged, to be wrongly accused, to be seen in ways that do not reflect your heart, these are painful experiences. The ego demands immediate correction, but noble silence teaches you that misunderstanding is part of human life. You cannot control every perception. What you can control is how you meet it. Silence allows you to rest in your own integrity without exhausting yourself in endless explanations. This practice also reshapes your inner world. Often, conflict continues long after the conversation ends, replaying in the mind with imagined rebuttals. Noble silence extends inward. It is the discipline of letting the argument fade in your thoughts, instead of rehearsing it endlessly. This inner silence brings peace not only with others but within yourself. Over time, noble silence becomes less about what you hold back and more about what you embody. You radiate calm, even in tension. Your presence communicates more than words could. People feel the steadiness in you, the refusal to be dragged into unnecessary battles. Silence becomes a language of its own, a language of peace, dignity, and wisdom. This way of being does not make conflict vanish from life, but it changes its nature. Arguments lose their grip on you. Misunderstandings no longer feel like threats. Hostility no longer pulls you into its orbit. You learn that peace is not the absence of disagreement, but the refusal to let disagreement destroy your inner stillness. Noble silence, then, is not silence of fear but silence of strength. It is the silence that says, I do not need to resist being misunderstood. I do not need to win every battle. I choose peace over pride. And in this choice, conflict loses its power to consume you. What remains is a steady calm, a clarity untouched by noise, and a wisdom that speaks most powerfully without words at all. When noble silence begins to shape the way you meet conflict, you discover that peace is not always about what you say, but about what you choose not to say. You no longer burn energy trying to force understanding, and in that restraint, you touch something larger, a recognition that you are not an isolated being, standing apart from others. Misunderstanding itself reveals the truth. You are bound up in the lives of those around you, influenced by their conditions, just as they are influenced by yours. To resist them is to resist yourself. From this realization unfolds the wisdom of interbeing, the dance of connection that shows you life is never separate but woven into a single living web. Interbeing means that nothing exists alone. A tree is not just a tree, it is sunshine, rain, soil, and the labor of countless forces that sustain it. You are not just you, you are your parents, your teachers, your ancestors, the food you eat, the air you breathe, the culture that shaped you. Every breath connects you to forests, every heartbeat to the earth's elements, every thought to the countless influences that formed your mind. To see this is to recognize that life is not made of separate selves, but of threads that only make sense in their weaving. When you resist life, you resist this web. You act as if you stand apart, as if your choices affect only you, as if others' struggles have nothing to do with your own. But interbeing reveals the illusion. Your suffering ripples outward, just as others' suffering touches you. Your joy nourishes others, just as theirs nourishes you. To harm another is to harm yourself, for the web is one. To care for another is to care for yourself, for there is no dividing line. This recognition dissolves much of the loneliness that afflicts modern life. The feeling of being cut off, of being misunderstood or unseen, softens when you realize that you have never truly been separate. The water in your body once moved through clouds and rivers. The oxygen in your lungs was exhaled by plants. Even your thoughts echo voices from those who came before. Interbeing shows that you belong not by earning it, but by being alive. Gratitude arises naturally because you see that your existence depends on an infinite network of support. Meditation on interbeing brings this truth closer. As you breathe, you can reflect, this breath is not mine alone. It carries the work of the earth, the trees, the unseen cycles that sustain it. With each inhale and exhale, you feel the web of life moving through you. This is not philosophy, but direct experience. You are not an island, you are the ocean. The dance of interbeing also changes how you see conflict. When someone hurts you, it is tempting to label them as enemy, separate from your life. But if you look more deeply, you see that their actions arise from conditions, their upbringing, their wounds, their struggles. These conditions are not separate from the larger web. To hate them is to hate part of the whole. This does not excuse harm, but it brings compassion. You begin to see that healing requires attending to the web itself, not just punishing a single thread. This wisdom transforms how you live in community. Instead of striving only for personal gain, you recognize that your well-being depends on the well-being of others. A society cannot thrive if its members are left behind. An environment cannot sustain if it is exploited. Interbeing makes clear that caring for others is not charity but necessity. You thrive together, or you suffer together. Every act of kindness strengthens the web. Every act of greed weakens it. Daily life offers countless reminders of this truth. The clothes you wear carry the work of countless hands you may never meet. The food you eat carries the labor of farmers, the rain, the sun, the soil. Even the technology you use is built from the work of minds and bodies across the world. Interbeing turns ordinary objects into reminders of connection, dissolving the illusion of separateness. You begin to walk through life with reverence, aware that every step touches countless lives. This view also reshapes responsibility. If everything is interconnected, then your choices matter not only for you, but for the whole. Each word spoken, each action taken, ripples outward. Resistance to this truth breeds denial and apathy. Acceptance of it awakens responsibility and compassion. You begin to act with care, not because you are forced, but because you recognize the web you are shaping with every decision. The beauty of interbeing is that it transforms even suffering into connection. When you ache, you realize others ache too. Your pain is not an isolated tragedy, but part of a shared condition. This awareness allows compassion to expand beyond the personal. You stop asking, "Why me?" and begin asking, "How can this teach me to love more deeply?" Suffering no longer isolates, but unites. Over time, this perspective dissolves resistance at its root. You no longer push against life as if it were separate from you. You no longer cling to the illusion of independence. You surrender into the dance, allowing yourself to be moved by the rhythms of interconnection. Life becomes less about control and more about harmony, less about self and more about the whole. And in that surrender, freedom arises. You no longer fear isolation because you see you are woven into everything. You no longer feel powerless because you see the influence of every choice. You no longer resist life because you understand that life is not outside of you, it is you. Interbeing is not a concept, but a lived reality. The recognition that you are a thread in the vast web, and that to resist the web is to resist yourself. When you embrace this truth, you discover peace in belonging, strength in connection, and joy in dancing with all of existence. When the truth of interbeing begins to take root, the weight of separation dissolves. You see that you have never been alone, that every breath, every step, every experience is woven into the lives of countless beings. This recognition brings humility, compassion, and a sense of belonging that steadies the heart. Yet something more delicate begins to arise when resistance to connection falls away, a quiet joy. Not the joy that depends on conditions going your way, not the fleeting thrill of success or approval, but the joy that emerges naturally when you stop fighting life. This is joy without conditions, a fragrance that arises from the simple act of non-resistance. Conditional joy is fragile. It depends on things being a certain way, on praise rather than criticism, on sunshine rather than rain, on gain rather than loss. When conditions change, as they always do, joy evaporates and suffering returns. The cycle of chasing and losing never ends. But unconditional joy does not lean on circumstances. It is not earned, acquired, or protected. It arises from alignment with the flow of life, from the freedom of no longer demanding that reality match your desires. This joy is subtle but profound. It can be felt in the quiet contentment of sitting in stillness, in the gentle appreciation of breath, in the recognition that you are part of the unfolding web of existence. It does not require special achievements or possessions. It arises naturally when the mind is no longer entangled in struggle. When resistance falls away, joy flows in, because the heart is finally open to the simple fact of being alive. Cultivating joy without conditions begins with awareness of how often joy is tied to preference. Notice how quickly the mind says, "I am happy because this happened," or "I cannot be happy until that changes." These thoughts expose the chains of conditional joy. By seeing them clearly, you can begin to loosen their grip. The practice is not to reject pleasant experiences, but to stop tying your happiness to their permanence. You enjoy them fully when they arise, and when they pass, your joy does not collapse with them. Meditation reveals this directly. As you sit, pleasant and unpleasant sensations arise. If you cling to the pleasant, suffering follows when it fades. If you resist the unpleasant, suffering deepens. But when you rest in awareness itself, beyond grasping or pushing, a gentle joy emerges. It is not dependent on what arises, but on the freedom of allowing everything to come and go. This joy is stable because it is rooted not in objects, but in openness. This joy also transforms how you relate to the ordinary. When joy no longer depends on grand conditions, the simplest things become radiant. The sound of birds, the warmth of tea, the rhythm of footsteps, all carry a sweetness when the mind is not busy resisting or demanding. Joy ceases to be something you chase in the distance and becomes something you uncover in the present. Relationships, too, are reshaped by this. Conditional joy often burdens love. I am happy only if you act this way, only if you remain the same, only if you fulfill my needs. But unconditional joy allows love to breathe. You are joyful not because others give you something, but because your heart is free from clinging. You can appreciate others as they are, without binding your happiness to their behavior. This makes relationships lighter, more generous, more enduring. Unconditional joy is not blind to suffering. It does not deny pain or pretend that difficulties do not exist. Rather, it coexists with them. Joy without conditions is the quiet glow that remains even in the midst of sorrow, because it is not tied to external circumstances. It is rooted in the freedom of non-resistance, in the recognition that life itself, with all its changes, is precious. This joy gives you resilience, allowing you to endure hardship without losing your inner light. The practice of gratitude supports this joy. When you thank life for both ease and difficulty, you stop dividing experience into categories of good and bad. You begin to see everything as part of the unfolding that shapes you. Gratitude dissolves resistance, and where resistance dissolves, joy appears. The heart cannot hold both bitterness and unconditional joy. By choosing gratitude, you create space for joy to arise naturally. This perspective also changes ambition. When joy is tied to outcomes, ambition becomes restless, striving, never satisfied. But when joy is unconditional, ambition becomes play. You work, create, and strive not to secure happiness, but as an expression of the joy already present. Success is enjoyed without clinging. Failure is endured without despair. Your energy is freed from the burden of chasing joy and can instead be poured into living fully. Over time, unconditional joy becomes a refuge. You no longer fear the loss of external conditions because you know joy is not dependent on them. You can walk through uncertainty, loss, even grief, with a steady heart that still knows joy in being alive, in breathing, in connecting. This joy is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and unshakable. It carries you through storms because it does not rely on the absence of storms. This joy is the natural fragrance of non-resistance. When you stop pushing against life, life opens itself to you. Every moment, whether pleasant or painful, becomes an opportunity to taste the sweetness of being. This joy does not need to be chased because it was never absent. It only waited for the struggle to fall away. And once you have touched it, you recognize it as your true nature, a joy that is not given by the world and therefore cannot be taken away. You've walked through a journey of wisdom tonight, from emptiness that dissolves fear, to the flow of effortless action, to the art of non-grasping, to transforming pain into compassion. You've seen how balance frees you from extremes, how samsara can be a teacher, how impermanence is not an enemy but a friend. You've learned the radical power of non-preference, the surrender of breath, the humility of ego, death, and how even obstacles reveal hidden doors. You've touched the stillness that remains in chaos, the noble strength of softness, the flow of karma as momentum, and the knowing that silence brings. You've glimpsed the freedom of no self, the joy of uncertainty, the compassion in suffering, the surrender of walking, the gratitude that shines through hurt, the wisdom of silence in conflict, the interbeing that binds us all, and the fragrance of joy without conditions. All of it points to one truth. Life does not need to be resisted. When you stop pushing and pulling, when you release clinging and soften your defenses, you discover freedom, compassion, and joy that cannot be shaken. This is not an escape from life. It is the deepest way of living it. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which teaching touched your heart the most tonight? Was it the gentleness of impermanence, the power of silence, or the joy of surrender? Share your reflection in the comments. Your words might be the light someone else needs. And if this journey has spoken to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you can continue walking the path of wisdom with me each week. Until next time, may your heart rest softly, may your breath carry you gently, and may you find peace in the flow of life.